OTB AM.
With Gillette. Get into your flow with the new Gillette Labs Razor with exfoliating bar.
We go live now with uninterrupted coverage of our continuing celebrations of the homecoming to our Tralee/Killarney/somewhere in Kerry correspondent, Eoin Sheehan. Eoin, good morning to you. Report, please.
Good morning, Ger. How are you doing?
Well, the croakiness in your voice gives you away straight away. How are you?
You've got a bit of croak as well going on there. Your happiness for Kerry seems to have, I guess, proven itself over the last couple of days. I'm surprised. I listened in yesterday. I'm surprised. I was expecting some sort of funereal atmosphere coming out of OTB AM Towers, but that's not what happened.
You did not listen in yesterday. That's a lie. You might have caught some of the clips on social. That's what my family do. They're like, "Oh, I was listening to you." Like, no, you weren't. You just checked the Twitter account. You're exactly the same.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. Well, to be fair, no, I did listen to the section that you and Nathan spoke to the Kerry players in the hotel. I did listen to that in full.
Okay.
And that was quite good. You did a good job.
Okay, an okay job. This is where we actually miss your knowledge of like the under 15 game where they got moved from forward to defence, and that was the sliding doors moment in their career that has now resulted in them being like the greatest new defender in the country. And that's the bit that we just didn't have yesterday. Why do we not have it? Because you took the day off in fear that they were going to lose. That's what happened. You did not take the day off in anticipation of celebration. You were the one who was scared of the funeral. You were the one who didn't back his team to get the job done and come in and take the celebratory lap of honour. Instead, we're 24 hours out now and nobody wants to hear anything from you today, Eoin. They've had enough. The papers are full of your Kerry people. We get it. It means a lot to you. You've got nothing but overpriced breakfast and football. It's fine. We understand it. Fair play to you. But you took the day off because you didn't back them.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, it's good that we're not going to have this conversation about what happened on Sunday, because I guess it's all about 2023 now, isn't it? And moving on to next year. And I think you got yelled a little bit in a few of those interviews as well yesterday. I think that there's
Jack O'Connor half yard is all. I'm not gonna compare it to the Dubs, but then everywhere else he's basically saying, look, this is it now. You all better get used to this. There's a new world order taking over.
I was at the homecoming in Killarney last night, and there was, I'd say, about half a dozen at least references to player X or Y who is going to win loads of All-Irelands, or who is going to or that they'll be back again next year. Like that was the sort of thing that would get the biggest cheer almost, that this is the start of something. Like walking out of the stadium One More Time by Daft Punk was playing, and there's a sense that there has to be a backup to this thing already. And on top of that, there probably won't be a quiet moment for these players for quite some time. By the sounds of things, I think it's quite a busy schedule. So I just hope that they get the opportunity to enjoy it and enjoy the one in a row, because that may well be all it is.
I know. I think they're enjoying it. I think that the scenes on the Lewis, the scenes at the Bohs Head, I think the very mention of Ibiza or Vegas, there's definitely this could be the longest winning party ever. And the best part about it is that you can have like a 2-month party and still be totally grand by the time the new season rolls around because of the split season.
Yeah, there's club action this weekend, so that should be interesting. Like, who will be? Will it be the most inebriated sort of round of fixtures in Kerry GA history? Possibly this I don't know, is it Saturday or Sunday? But there's championship, I think, this weekend. So that possibly puts the brakes on them for one day at least, and then the celebrations continue next week, and probably fly off to Ibiza midweek next week.
Mullerbly asks, has Eoin just left D2? Seems it. What's the Kerry equivalent of D2? Yeah.
What does seems it mean? I mean, that's if it seemed like I was leaving D2, I wouldn't be on this morning. I can put it like that. No, there was the D2 thing. Obviously, that would have been. I think that was probably the thing that was the biggest fear, wasn't it? That people probably looked at that and said, look at these people getting ahead of themselves. And I would suspect that there was a few people with that image saved in their phone that were ready to tweet it on Sunday night if Galway didn't get beaten.
You guys were the ones who were paranoid about that, right? Because the whole country basically understood that there is always a party for the teams. It's totally fine. But
the whole country didn't understand that.
They did. They absolutely did. And,
no, they didn't.
And they gently took the piss out of any of the Kerry people in their circumference. And the Kerry people immediately were like, "What? This is outrageous. Of course we had a party. We have a party even when we win." It's like, what? No, I didn't even mention it. I mean, that was certainly, as I got accosted by your entourage on Saturday night. That was the first thing. It was like, you've been given. I was like, no. Tommy gave out mildly about it. I guess what I'm trying to say here is the level of paranoia was at an all-time high on Saturday night.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is a certain county that has lived absolute rent-free in your head for quite some time here. It's almost like you're debating yourself in studio there. Like,
well, I mean, you can bring all your buddies in if you want, but there was definitely.
Yeah. All the heavies are coming in.
Should we publish the WhatsApp conversation? I realise you were off WhatsApp, except you made one exception at the second half for like brief moment to find an old message that you sent us from the semi-final, where you were worried that they were going to cough up the massive advantage they had in the semi-final, and then it was like, okay, the team in green and gold, or Mayo, basically, was your. You had fears.
Well, of course I did. I mean, that's what makes the whole thing so brilliant over the last 2 days, is that it is just a wild wave of relief. And I'd be surprised if you didn't get that impression off some of the players either. And I think that like a few of them have alluded to that over the last 2 days as well, that there has been a number of massive defeats that they've taken since 2019 in particular. Like, they will feel that they should have an All-Ireland medal before this year. And that's a pretty hard burden to carry, feeling that maybe you didn't live up All-Ireland medals-wise to the potential that you've shown over the last 3 years in particular. So, of course, there was that. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, that there was concerns about an All-Ireland final, which Kerry were favourites for, because that comes with burden. But thankfully, we are not the high-performing athletes. We are the weak-minded, not psychologically trained people who just watch these games. So we can allow ourselves to get that way. But the players, it seemed, didn't allow it to affect their performance too much, because if it did, going behind early in that game, I think probably would have had a significant impact.
It did. I think it did impact their performance. Certainly, that was why they were nervy and snatching and stuff in the first half, and then they come through it, which actually would lead you to think that not only are they deserving champions, but there's lots to build on. Like, not to get too carried away here, but the age profile of the team is excellent, and also the significant improvement of many key players who kind of emerged as leaders who aren't the superstars, but who could well be superstars of the next 5, 6, 7 seasons if they continue to play at the level they've played at. We keep talking about how few goals were conceded this year and saying, it's a collective responsibility, it's down to Paddy Tally's play. But like, talking to them yesterday, they were talking about the individual coaching that has made them better defenders one-on-one and more confident defenders one-on-one. So you add in good system, but you also have to factor in the fact that some of those players are bigger, more mature, more physical, and they've now got the game smarts and the confidence that comes from being All-Ireland champions. And you must be feeling pretty confident about the birth of a new golden age.
Like, maybe. Like, I think it's like very, very hard to kind of like zoom out and look at that, especially when they are just being crowned All-Ireland champions. I think there's like a real temptation to just be like, oh, well, this team is going to go and dominate football. I don't see one team dominating this next decade of football. I think like a golden age for Kerry right now could look like 3-4 medals over the course of their career. Like that would be a good return if we're going to enter a hugely competitive period. Like, we can't forget that we've had 3 different All-Ireland winners in a row. We've had 5 different finalists over the last 3 years. You look at the contenders that are probably going to be in the mix next year. Galway are going to be back, but Tyrone are going to be back after what happened this year with a new superstar kid talent. The Dublin situation is fascinating, and that would make them probably second favourites at the outset of next year. And a lot of people will be tipping them for All-Ireland glory next year. And then you don't need me to go through the rest of the counties that have really interesting managerial shake-ups going on, with some counties with some excellent players who've been on the precipice of All-Ireland glory. So I don't subscribe to this idea that there's going to be some sort of dominance, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be more All-Irelands on the horizon. It's just a really hard thing to do, like if we talk about 2023, to go and win 2 in a row at the first time of asking. Like, very few teams do it. Like, even the Limerick Hurlers, 2019, they get caught after their first All-Irelands. I think that's Dubs. A pretty good reference point. Yeah. The Dubs, obviously, like, and even 2013, like, it's 2014 to get beaten. Like, I know the Kilkenny thing, it's probably not that team, but they win 2000 and they can't come back to win in 01, except they win in 06 and they win in 07, and on it goes. But maybe that's not the best reference. But I think the Dublin and Limerick reference points, they show that the second year is really hard. But on the flip side of that coin, the talents that they have that people aren't appreciative of just yet is still very, very deep. And nobody was surprised to see Graham O'Sullivan performed the way he did on Sunday, but that was a sort of national arrival for him. There are a handful of other Graham O'Sullivans that are waiting to make their mark over the next couple of years if they get the opportunity. But I think that there's just a couple of positions maybe that they need a bit more depth in, but mostly that they're well stacked.
Yeah, and that was the point. That Moyles was making the bench is fairly thin at the moment, but actually over the next 18 months and 2 years, that those great minor teams will start becoming more mature, and it won't just be the superstars who are making it from those squads. So anyway, I'm going to tell everybody what's coming up between now and 10 o'clock. It's 7:40 this morning here on OTB AM. Diarmuid O'Sullivan is going to join us at 7:55 to talk about the career of Brian Cody. Daniel Lambert from Bohemians is going to talk to us about the issue of all of the young lads joining League One clubs in England. We've got sports news for you at 8:40. Kevin Walsh going to give us the Galway perspective at 8:50. Alan Quinlan back in studio for the first time in a long time at 9:10. And more reaction to the end of the Brian Cody era from two of his chief lieutenants, talking with Joe on the show. Lots of people saying, long day, Owen. Owen looks fresh as stale bread. What was it like?
It was very, very good crack, to be fair. It was like one of those, it was like just a big wedding, was like the last couple of days, that just trying to soak it all in, trying to chat to as many people as possible. That's what the whole thing was. It's bad, but people are saying I looked like stale bread, to be honest, because like I'm actually not feeling that bad at all. It wasn't like this massive bender for 2 days. It was just like a very, very happy couple of days where you're, as I say, just trying to soak it all in on both nights.
They don't know that you'd lost your voice kind of about 15 minutes into the game, and that's all this is.
This is match related, but like I know you were texting me yesterday looking for like gossip from the night and all that, and there generally would be from an All-Ireland final night, and it was tame as there could be, as you could possibly imagine on Sunday night, and then last night was fairly chilled out as well. I think by all accounts Tralee had a bigger homecoming than Killarney last night, just in terms of numbers. Like Denny Street did look fairly packed last night. We were in Killarney, and maybe it wasn't as busy as it would have been in the past, but I think somebody remarked that it was maybe the busiest Tralee was for a homecoming since 1997. So there is definitely that sort of kind of tension that's built up over 8 years where people have been waiting for this. Yeah.
What is standing out to people in terms of the bit that actually wins the game for them? Is it all Clifford, but is there other stuff that people are talking about?
I think, like I mentioned, Graham O'Sullivan already. So outside of that, I think probably it's Shane Ryan's coolness in the last two games in particular, which has been something that maybe has stood out. Now, I know he's had like great moments in the past, so again, it's nothing new. Like he was, if I recall correctly, I thought he had some really good moments in the drawn game in 2019, and maybe those are the moments that forge this All-Ireland, because he's been through that experience. And I think the same can go for Jack Barry and Diarmuid O'Connor. I need to watch the game back, and I need to find out how Killian McDade ended up scoring 4 points, and yet we're still here saying that Diarmuid O'Connor and Jack Barry were both brilliant. So maybe both of those things can be true, but certainly from kickouts they were sensational. So yeah, the midfield, the goalkeeper, absolutely outstanding, and obviously, like, I mean, David Clifford is just wonderful. To be fair, I haven't seen too many people who've made the case against Shane Walsh as man of the match, and that obviously includes Kerry people. I think everybody accepted that he was the man of the match on Sunday.
Yeah, if it didn't get it, and that decision's now been made, and you can't really go back and revisit it, and it's like, well, there's definitely some times where it's okay. You can still do the interview with Clifford. You know, it's fine. You can get him up if you want to have an interview with him, but like, not getting the official man of the match award in the All-Ireland final is actually something that will matter when Shane Walsh is 60. There'll be something missing from his mantelpiece that should have been there. And these things, you know, the individual awards don't matter. They do matter, because, like, you know, maybe it drives him on to greater feats next year, but I don't know if anything is ever going to be greater than that. One slight caveat to everything that's happening at the moment is Paddy Talley, I didn't realise this, was actually on a year sabbatical, and so that year sabbatical is up. He does not live in Kerry. He does not live close to Kerry. It's a huge burden to be driving 600-mile round trips for training sessions. Maybe he could just do one a week now that his system has been installed and everybody knows what it is, and technology being what it is, they could live stream some of the other ones. I don't know. Is there a way that they can make this work, or was that what his job done? Off he goes, off into the sunset.
I think it'd be a massive blow if they lost him, because it definitely feels as if it's not job done. Like I don't think it was a complete performance from Kerry on Sunday. I think that there's still room for improvement in their performance levels. Like, they did not bring their A game whatsoever on Sunday, and they will be looking at that over the course of the winter as to how they can get better again. And the main reason that they seem to have got better this year is because of his coaching. So it would make sense for him to be brought on to improve again next year. So yeah, I've heard that the sabbatical. I hadn't realised that until yesterday actually, that he was on a sabbatical from work, and that obviously would have contributed easily to him being able to travel to Kerry. So that would be a significant blow. Like I think for everybody else in the management team, I'm sure that they're hungry to go again and to try and do it again next year. But if Paddy Tally just can't commit, that is a setback. And I'm not sure what the setup is in terms of coaching in Kerry, and if there's somebody else who could be installed, or if there's another outsider that could potentially be installed into the Kerry camp. But that's a problem that they probably need to sort out fairly quickly if that's going to happen.
The influence that he's had, I presume everybody is delighted with that, and there's like oh my God, this is incredible how great he has been and what an impact he's had generally.
Yeah, like it does still feel like it's not real when they were in Killarney last night and all of their names are being announced and all the backroom team is being announced and Paddy Tally's name gets announced and the massive cheer in Killarney goes up with green and gold flags. It just doesn't feel real. It doesn't make sense. And I think that there was probably a stubborn clinging to kind of nonsense tradition for a while that was maybe broken away with when Tally was brought in this year, and it's paid off handsomely. And I think there's two things about Jack O'Connor. First of all, surrounding himself with the right people this year has been brilliant, and that was a significant factor in them winning. And then also the ruthlessness with his in-game decisions was the other reason why Kerry won this All-Ireland. So it's a pretty simple thing: make the right decisions, get your personnel right on the pitch and off the pitch, and they're the two things that he's done really well. But yeah, like the Tally thing, it's just been so well documented all year. From the moment he was linked with the job, there was talk about him having a bit of an impact on Kerry, and it's worked. It's worked. He's got the All-Irelands, and other counties that are going to be sniffing around thinking, how can we get a little bit of this as well?
That will be definitely true, and also I think it means that many other counties are going to be looking to the freshening up of their backroom team, and also the fact that he is so famously a defensive coach. You know, this might be a new era where everybody looks to have a defensive coach on their backroom team, and let's wait and see what impact that has on the quality of football, because not every team has a Shane Walsh or a Clifford that will allow the team to break through. And you know, maybe we're about to enter a new era of loads of 8-6s again. What else? What other takeaways from the weekend on?
It's hard to know. What other takeaways was there from the weekend? It was just really, really fun. You know, like actually kind of experiencing a win for Kerry again. I'm not sure. Is it going down as one of the better All Irelands of recent years? I don't think it was on a level of a Dublin Mayo or a Dublin Kerry final. But I think maybe it was better than last year's final. It was better than the 18 final. There was varying degrees of optimism or negativity around the spectacle after the game. Like some people said it was one of the worst All Irelands they've ever seen, and then I was speaking to other people who said it was one of the best they've ever seen. I thought it was really good.
I think when you've got Shane Walsh and Clifford doing what they did, it's an all-time great final because of that. It might not be better than some of the best games that we've ever seen, and I think the fact that while it was level, it didn't feel like Galway were going to be capable of pulling off the upset in the last 5-7 minutes of the game, and you need that jeopardy. The great thing about the Mayo finals was there was a sense of jeopardy that this all-time great team might be caught by this other team. It didn't feel that way. Maybe it did for you as a Kerry fan, but it felt like their goose was cooked, especially when the free was given. That was and also there's just a few wides that they started to kick at that point. McDade had picked up a bit of an injury. Conroy had gone off. I suspect Conroy got injured much more badly than we thought when he had that block and kick in the first half, and that's why his influence on the game wasn't as strong as it might have been. But that's for the dark winter months. The other news, obviously, in the last 24 hours was about the managerial merry-go-round. The Herald printed yesterday that Jason Sherlock may well be on his way to Monaghan. We now know that Colin O'Rourke is the Meath manager. This is pretty interesting. These are going to have a significant impact on the power rankings.
Yes, we haven't done power rankings in a long time, actually. I don't know where these counties are. But the JO thing is
Monaghan's in Ulster and Meath is in Leinster.
Yes. The JO thing is possibly the more interesting of the two. And they will have been very, very disappointed with how things went over the last couple of seasons. And I think that do they consider themselves in that pack just outside the top 2 or 3 counties where they feel they can push on. They can do a Galway or maybe even a Tyrone of the last 2 years and try and do something special with a new manager. I'd be really interested to see what he does as the main man in the camp, because obviously his time with Jim Gavin was wildly successful. So you'd imagine he'd be a really good appointment. And then the Colm O'Rourke thing is mad, really. I didn't see this coming at all, despite the fact that he is one of the most famous GAA men that exists. It does feel that it kind of came out of left field. And the key to him is how well his selectors are going to do. And I think that's probably what this year's All-Ireland probably shows us to a degree, and what Limerick have done as well, especially in hurling over the last few years. Who you surround yourself with as a manager is possibly the most important thing you're going to do when you go into a camp. So that's going to be the big job for Colm O'Rourke. And you know what, they're going to lean into Meathness over the next season, you'd suspect, and hopefully they can be bullish in trying to take down the Dubs, but they look like a massive gulf between them this year.
Yeah, definitely, and that gulf has been there now for basically 15 years. I do wonder if there's something in establishing a defensive platform and then trying to suck a team down to your level, because none of the teams in Leinster have tried that with Dublin, like really, in any way. I don't know. We're trying to fix Leinster football here, so maybe we'll stop. And in terms of the future for Kerry, like the excitement they are talking about going straight back at it, does the split season actually help with that? In that, like, legitimately, the scenes that we're seeing are scenes of like an outpouring at the end of, you know, a Kerry style famine. But I think it's also about the level of expectation that there's been around the era of Clifford and O'Shea, and so once they've started to deliver, everybody can relax a little bit. I do feel like they're on the verge of something really great, and I know you're making the point, but that seems to be the atmosphere around the team, that this is something special, and in a way that's why it's more enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. And like, just to clarify, I just have concerns just about next year in particular, as opposed to this team as a whole. Of course, the odds are in their favour to win more. I just hold my horses on saying 2023 is going to be another successful year. But maybe like the split season does work in their favour. There are just so many competitions in Kerry to get played off that I'm not sure if the split season will allow them to go on their holiday early, for example. And I know Jack O'Connor mentioned that in his interview with you yesterday, that the league is such an important competition to Kerry, and they've really targeted that over the last 3 years. If you go on your holiday as All-Ireland champions, chances are you're going to go into the league ill-prepared, and that's the way it has been for the last few yees, unless you can get it done early, unless you can get it done maybe before Christmas. But I'm not sure that's possible in a county like Kerry with all the different competitions that they have. So it could be the start of next year before they go, and that'll eat into the league time. So, like, I mean, maybe that's something that they get used to, and maybe that's kind of something that they can take away for future years. But also, how many more years of this split season are we going to have? Like, is the All-Ireland going to be played maybe a little bit later next season? And we've obviously got a different format going into next year too. But yeah, you'd like to think they can make it work in their favour.
You think that more games will actually suit Kerry?
Yeah, as I say, I think when Anthony Miles yesterday was talking about the inside forwards that Kerry needs to unearth, I think he was like bang on. That's the one position maybe they need to unearth, maybe one more player, or just hope that Killian Spillane and Tony Brosnan just get to the next level. But I do think in pretty much every other position there is really good depth that maybe people aren't aware of, and I think that more games will absolutely suit them. Now the thing is with this new format next year is that the stakes aren't overly high. So that this whole piece about, winning tough games, winning knockout games, and, getting down to man number 20 in the white heat of battle in the knockout match, that's actually not going to matter until a very late stage in the season, because only one team in these 14 groups are going to get knocked out. So there's going to be a steady nature to it all. It is going to feel like the National League, I suspect, for a period of that summer. And to be fair, Kerry have done very well in the National League. Like, Kerry and Dublin have both done very well in the National League, and that's because of the size of their squad that they brought to the table early in the year.
Yeah, there's a bit of a dog's dinner to the format next year, which people haven't quite woken up to just yet, which means that a lot of those games will be largely meaningless. They've managed to create an entire section of the year that's going to be nothing but dead rubbers, really. Anyway, 7:54 OTB AM is brought to you live each morning by Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. Sean O'D says, I thought it was great All-Ireland. I had a fear Galway were going to go very defensively, but fair play, they didn't, and Kerry had to really fight to win that game. Adrian Kelly says, lads, there's nothing predetermined in the GAA. The night of the 2014 All-Ireland, Eamon Fitzmaurice said, we're off the mark with a smirk, says Adrian Kelly. I'm sure he didn't have a smirk. I'm sure he was just happy with the fact that he'd won All-Ireland, and, they were off the mark. And who knows? I mean, they were involved in some very good games over the next couple of years that there was just a matter of inches between them and further glory. Shane says, what about the Kerry midfield? Not as strong as they think. I mean, it's pretty strong. McDaid might just be a superstar. Like that might be what's happened here, is that we've witnessed the birth of a genuine midfield superstar in Galway, and actually they more than broke even with him in the first half, and then the changes happened, and in the second half, it got a bit messy because he was probably running into pockets of space that they weren't accounting for.
Yeah, possibly. I'd also say to that is that Kerry have Stefan Akunbar to come into the mix next season, and I suspect will play in that position. The only bad news for Kerry this week is that Mark O'Connor has extended his contract down in Australia for another 2 years, but he'll be 28 at the end of that contract. I mean,
a fine age
days, Mark.
Fine age to come home.
Yeah, absolutely. So they could fix that if that becomes an issue.
I mean, surely somebody in Kerry, and I'm talking about the food company, can be like, think of your future career. What would you like to do? We've got loads of roles here. Loads and loads of roles all over the country. You don't even have to live in Kerry if you don't want to.
Yeah, you can live in Kildare. I mean,
exactly.
That's how lucky you can be, Mark.
Well, they stopped off on the way home. I noticed that there was a big staging post, Kildare, just to rub it in our faces. Hey lads, this is what it looks like. You all have your photograph taken with it. Oh, look, it's your manager. No, it's not.
Oh, God.
0879 180 180 if you want to send us anything. Or if anybody else has any better gossip than Owen Sheehan managed to get over the last 24 hours, then we're all ears for it. What was the song they were singing on the Lewis?
It was Billy Joel, wasn't it?
Was it?
We didn't start to fire. There's a Kerry version of it. They were asked to sing it last night, and they played the song through the tannoy, and the mic was passed around, and they just flat out refused. They were like, no, we're not doing it. And it's like, there's literal video evidence of you singing it on the Lewis earlier, Paul Murphy.
Yeah. And
he was just like, no, not doing it.
You should have done it. It would have been an all-timer. Right, OTB AM is brought to you live each morning by Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. We're turning our attention now to the retirement of Brian Cody. And I'm delighted to say Cork's Diarmuid O'Sullivan is with us to give us a perspective of what it was like to actually come up against his team. Diarmuid, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Morning, Ger. How are you doing?
I'm very good.
You're in good form today. The Kerry victory seems to have heightened your spirits. Has it?
I certainly, I'm enjoying.
Well, it hasn't mine. I'll just put it out there. It hasn't for me, but obviously it's done something for you.
I'm obviously covering it up very well, then, Diarmuid. I'm delighted for Owen, and I'm delighted for his people, but
yeah,
I'm scared about a new dark age. To be honest, I'm legitimately scared about a new dark age where Kerry overlords. And they just take it for granted. That's my concern here.
That's fine. We leave them play that piece out for a while and see how it goes.
Come here. We wanted to talk about Brian Cody, right? So you were in teams that beat Brian Cody's teams, and you were in teams that were beaten by Brian Cody's teams. Was there something?
Absolutely.
Was there something consistent when you came up against what you knew you were going to face when he was in charge?
I suppose the funny thing about this, guys, right, is we're still kind of waiting for this famous Wolf of Wall Street clip to appear with Brian Cody in it, and his fist clenched and that steely determination in his face. I'm not leaving, I think it's still in the back of our mind somewhere, because that dogged determination that we've seen in Brian through years, it's just, it's still all a bit surreal. And it's probably the National League kicks off next year. We'll be still scratching, is there a Tom Brady in this guy in the back of his head somewhere, So we'd be afraid to nearly put full closure on here in Cork just to make sure he is gone. And that's with the greatest respect to the man, because, you asked me at the outset there, Ger, what did he bring? Brian's teams, I mentioned in his own characteristic there, that steely determination that, they were constantly going to die with their boots on regardless of where the result was heading. And from his first team to his last team in the All-Ireland final a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I think that resonated throughout his tenure of a big manager at Kilkenny.
You guys were probably the first proper rival of his era in many respects. You won the All-Ireland final in 99, and so I guess that gave you a great sense of confidence when you were going up against him that you could win those games, really, because there were definitely some counties who felt like, oh, this is Kilkenny and this is Cody and this is Shefflin, and not that they were beaten before they went out, but certainly when the game was in the melting pot, they didn't have what it took. But for your team in particular, the introduction in 99 of a bunch of under-21s who went on to be like all-time greats, it must have been a strange kind of for you guys to watch just how powerful the Cody era became and how long it lasted.
Yeah, and not only that, it was extremely difficult to take. From a Cork perspective, to look at the way they dominated. Once they defeated us in 2006, once they dominated that next period, until Tipperary came along and challenged them there for a while. But go back to '99. Again, we were young, we were fearless, we didn't know what was ahead of us. An All-Ireland final, it was new, so it didn't trouble us. But so we could always go out and it was a free shot. We'd been successful under 21. Brian was only just stepping into the role there anyway, so he hadn't really created the monster just yet. So we knew there was a real good opportunity for us. I suppose what really sticks out for me that year and something that kind of sticks out since, Cork played Kilkenny in a challenge game that year down in Kilkenny of an opening of a field. I can't exactly put my finger on where we played them, guys, but we're really young. Went down there, we got an incredible trimming, 15, 16, 17 points beaten out the gate by a very strong Kilkenny team, and subsequently turned them over in the All-Ireland final. And only once to date have Cork and Kilkenny played a challenge game mid-season following that.
Right.
And that was a fundraiser for Jamie Wall a number of years ago in Parky Ring. Brian Cody has refused since that date to play Cork in a challenge game at any stage throughout the season. So, we'd set we'd our own little moral victory there that Brian would not play Cork in a challenge game throughout the season. So it was just an interesting one and an interesting take from our perspective, So we had kind of put the Indian sign over him. He wasn't going to take a chance again. We'd gone to Kilkenny with a young team. They'd beaten the life out of us. We turned up in All-Ireland final. They lashing out the heavens, and we end up turning him over by a couple of points. How did you face a Brian Cody Kilkenny team? It's with the greatest respect to all the guys we played against. It was like meeting the bully boy in school. If you lay down to the bully boy in school, he'd keep chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at you. But if you're willing to stand up, put your shoulders back and take what pain was coming your way and work your way through it, you always had a chance against Kilkenny. You had to face him. You had to eyeball him. You had to look him straight in the eyes. Grant, you might be, in your head, you might be stronger, you might be fitter, you might be quicker, you might be a better hurler. But us Cork guys, we give everything, and I think, that's where the rivalry really started.
You don't ever get the sense that, Diarmuid, that Brian Cody ever forgot easily then, just with that anecdote you tell about the challenge matches there, that he had a great way of using a grudge or creating a grudge in his head almost for the betterment of his team.
Oh, absolutely. I think Brian, not that his and his teams needed too many motivated factors, but he always had something small, no doubt, in the back of his mind to instill that extra bit of determination in his team as they were getting ready for combat.
That period, maybe we kind of need to go back and revisit a bit more, because the 99 All-Ireland final, if people are unfamiliar, it finishes 13-12 is the final score in the end. But your team is really young, and that's the bedrock of the team that goes on to be the Cork team for the next kind of 8, 9, 10 years even. The Kilkenny team there has Shefflin and McGarry, but all the rest of them are kind of coming towards the end of their career. So basically, they win the All Ireland the next year. We shouldn't ignore that after Offaly stopped you in the semis. But
correct.
That team changes dramatically then around 02, 03, 04, and they go toe to toe with you guys who do back to backs, and then they stop your 3 in a row. So it's a real, if you were to take kind of from 97, 98. And 99 when you guys come in to their end to them doing the 3 in a row, that's a period of very intense rivalry between you two.
Yeah, it was a very, very intense period, but it's while rivalry is great, Ger, there was always the ultimate respect between both squads, because they knew what we were putting into it. We were fully aware of what they were putting into it, and I don't think it ever crossed the line where it where it got really nasty or cynical throughout the games. It was just both sets of teams go man for man. When hurling was slightly different back then, it wasn't wasn't as tactical as it is now. So it allowed guys to go toe to toe under the 1v1 battles out in the field. And I think, that in itself allowed for huge contests and huge battles throughout that period of the mid 2000s there.
It was all a bit spicier too, because you guys were believing and kind of helping to drive forward the momentum of the GPA. Kilkenny were a little bit more reluctant to get involved. Cody seemed to be somewhere, but never quite publicly in the ether when it came to that. Did that add a bit of spice? Because there's definitely stories from All Stars trips where there was, I wouldn't say hatred, but certainly less collegiality than you might expect when everybody's getting pissed.
Yeah, absolutely, and I suppose that's the problem with drink. They'll always bring out something. They say that the truth always comes out with a few points. Whether we can take that with a pinch of salt, but yeah, there's no doubt there was debated conversations along the way somewhere. But I think everyone always shook hands at the end of it, and respected each other's decisions and opinions, and kind of moved on.
Was it enjoyable having them as rivals, or was it kind of sickening at the end where they come out on top?
As a Corkman, it was hard to take. Yeah, absolutely. We'd stopped them to 3 in a row. We were starting to build our own thing. 2006, we felt we're going up there with the right opportunity, but we had to guard against, what we'd done to them previously. And unfortunately, they came out, the grass was long in Croke Park. They stopped the running game. They flooded bodies back. So it was probably, Kilkenny don't do tactics, but yet we work like dogs. We get a few bodies back. However, they managed to get the grass long and keep the grass long in Croke Park all Ireland final day. But that's for another day. But so yeah, look, it was disappointing, but it was just the experience they gained throughout the number of seasons previous watching us and engaging with us,
And you would have obviously kind of seen up close as well in his latter years as a selector, the Brian Cody at the end of his managerial career. So yeah. What's your take on the arc of Cody and the changes that he allowed himself to make over the course of his career?
I think Brian is an extremely interesting character, and I think the hurling fraternity can be very grateful for what Brian has not only brought to Kilkenny but brought to the game of hurling, and over nearly a quarter of a century, to be so dominant and so well respected throughout the game. His legacy will go on for a long time. But I remember back in 2001, I suppose it's something that just, again, it just resonates with me, and where Brian Cody was and in his mindset in relation to winning and determination. We were down in Buenos Aires in an All-Star trip. I think it was 2001, and obviously the All-Star game was taking place. It could have been the Sunday. So back then, boys being boys, we were out on the Saturday having a few beers. Crack was mighty, as you can imagine. Way in a foreign land. Great time going on. Kind of the match was the back of our mind. So Sunday morning came one way or another anyway. Sunday afternoon came, just 25, 26 degrees down in Buenos Aires. As you can imagine, a couple of Irish lads, half sunburnt, half hungover. Ball was thrown in anyway, 1919 versus 2000 team. It was on Damien Hayes from Galway. And now, he wasn't the ideal fella, lads, I can assure you, to be marking, with the sun splitting the stones and a few beers running down the forage. It wasn't really the ideal place for me to be. Not to mind anyone else. So he was giving me a bit of a runaround. And I'll never forget, Brian Cody called me at half time. And I'm not sure why he said it to me, right? He said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Why are you leaving Hayes?" He said, "Run around the field," he said, "and dominate you like that." And I was kind of finding it hard to breathe, not to mind taking what he was saying to me. He said, he said, fast forward the clock, he said, to the middle of the summer, he said, Cork are playing Galway. He said, "Are you going to leave Damien Hayes running around the field like that?" He said, "You're actually going to do something about it." And I was thinking to myself, geez, here I am, I'm half hungover, we're down in Argentina playing a game. And that really resonated with me, with Brian and his mentality. throughout, you know, anytime I crossed him, either on the field or on the sideline, that, you know, this guy is a genuine hurling person. And I suppose as time went on, Brian evolved and he created team after team after team. And again, he can walk away with his head held extremely high. Not that needs a pat in the back from a court man to tell him he can walk away from his job with his held head high. Even up to last Sunday week again, he walked away and he left an incredibly imposing opposition behind him for any manager coming through. But Brian on the line, you always knew he would give, like, and obviously resonated with these players, that he would give you everything. Off the field, he will give you everything, and he will fight for every last ball for his squad while the 70, 75 minutes of the game was going on.
That's mad. He couldn't help himself from helping you, even though at some stage you might be chasing one of his forwards around, maybe a Richie Hogan or somebody, going, "Oh, I shouldn't have told him about that Damien Hayes thing.
Absolutely,
I shouldn't have given him the inspiration." But he needed.
I don't think it ever troubled him after. I said, "Gosh, it didn't really matter." I don't think it really troubled him. But yeah, it was mad, absolute mad. But you know what? It just always stood in the back of my head.
You know that point about them not doing tactics was nonsense, right? Because we know that there was a forward line there who would change around depending on who was going well and who wasn't going well, and like all sorts of other things were happening. They just didn't call it tactics at the time, but even though it absolutely was. So what were they like to play against as a forward unit? Because so Shefflin plays in that final in '99. I think it's his second or third season at that stage. And
I'd say it's only his first.
Is it? So 99 was his first.
It was only his first, Ger. Yeah, only his first. Of course,
sure, right. Otherwise he would have won. Otherwise he would have won the 11. It's a fair point. So you guys, you witnessed that career evolve and develop. I think you probably would have been marking him that day, would you?
I was marking him for a while. Yeah, himself and DJ. Yeah, they were kind of swapping again. Even go back to that early point. You know, there was a little bit of movement. You know, if you were being kind of starved of the ball in your own position, they kind of had that license to rotate between the marquee players. John Power was another one of them. So they had the authority to make them little switches that appeared throughout games, and definitely through the 2000s as it further developed. You know, Shefflin, Larkin, Brennan, all these guys had the autonomy and the authority to put themselves in positions where they were going to be dangerous if they were starved the ball.
Yeah, and that I think is really interesting for a manager who obviously is supposed to be this I rule with an iron fist, completely ruthless, but actually he gives the players the freedom to make decisions, to play. Essentially, now it's heads up hurling, but then it was like, play what you see. If you need to make the changes, you make the changes. Don't be waiting for us to tell you exactly what to do.
Yeah, and what that showed, it showed Brian always had faith and trust in his players and his big players to make the right decisions, you know, and to have that support from a manager gives a player fierce confidence.
Yeah, look, I do think that rivalry, when it comes to be excavated again, is going to go down as one of the great rivalries, because your team in '99 and the team that finishes the final in 06 isn't massively different, but there's a complete turnaround in the Kilkenny team between those two periods. So that again is the other sign of a great manager. Is like, you come in, you see, okay, I can win All Ireland with this group, but actually I need to get these other younger players through, and that's the evolution of it. And I suppose that's the bit where the comparison to Ferguson is at its most appropriate.
Oh, absolutely. To you know, to be able to identify further ahead, okay, I'm going to need a cornerback in 12 months' time, I'm going to need 2 forwards in 2 years' time, but it was how he strategically did it over that period of time. He'd bring a guy in for a championship game for 5 minutes, bring a guy in for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and build him up over a prolonged period of time, that when he'd earned his right then to start in his Kilkenny team, he'd his apprenticeship served, he'd his time done, and now here you go. Now is your opportunity. If you want to take it. If not, I will have some other guy to come into the breach and take it on from you.
Diarmuid, great stuff this morning. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks a million. It's Diarmuid Rock O'Sullivan there, giving us his thoughts on the Cody era and what it was actually like to come up against various different iterations of it. 14 minutes past 8 this morning. You can see the people in Cork are delighted for you too, Owen.
Yeah, that's the main one. That's the main one. The hurling fraternity in Cork, absolutely delighted for Kerry footballers. That's one we were hoping for.
Hurling and football, of course, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, very fair point. Yeah, I'd like. I mean, that'll that'll probably change. I think what we got a sense of last week was that most people were probably up for Galway, and maybe if Kerry are on top of the tree next year, most people will be rooting against them, and that'll be the way it goes. So happy days, I guess, is the only thing you can say to that.
You're ready for it, right? A reminder that Braeburn Coffee is the official coffee partner of OTB. Each week we're giving one lucky viewer a €100 voucher to spend on some Braeburn coffee goodness at an Applegreen store near you. To enter, just check out @OffTheBall on Twitter, like and retweet our Braeburn competition post, and you'll be in the draw. Braeburn Coffee never compromises on quality or taste. To give you the very best on-the-go coffee experience on the road, it's available at Applegreen today. After the ad breaks, we're going to be joined in studio by the Chief Operating Officer of Bohemians, Daniel Lambert, talking about the issue of some League of Ireland players being sold. First, here is Enda McGinley on last night's Off the Ball, comparing David Clifford with another great in Peter Canavan.
We're all going to have 10 odd years of, and hopefully he stays injury free, but look, he's got all the talents. What I seen him match, I think it was actually Kerry, might have been, it was some form of a knockout game up in Clonus against Monaghan, and it ended up a draw, and Clifford had been massive to drag Kerry to get the draw at the end. The draw was an amazing result on the day for Kerry because they looked well out and beaten, and the players were clearing off the pitch, and I was just happened to be watching Clifford, and he was an angry man coming off. He was disgusted, and this was maybe 2-3, this must have been 3 years ago, so he was only a cub. And yet he had that anger, he had that leadership, he had that expectation of the Kerry team. Whenever I seen that, because we all were aware of his talent and everything else from the minor days, whenever I seen that, I thought, okay, he has that, because you mentioned Canavan there, that's what struck anybody playing in alongside or in the dressing rooms with Canavan. The thing that's always, you got it full in the face, was that massive competitive desire. And you seen it yesterday, and there was that wee bit of a contrast with Walsh too. Clifford was pumped up every ball. He was jumping. There's a wee bit of a showmanship. He's turning to the crowd, but there is anger in everything he does. He is so determined and so competitive. And I think with that, with his, Colin mentioned, his physical size, then his speed, which surprised everybody a few games ago when he just blitzed and people sort of forgot because he plays the game in such a beautiful, sort of relaxed manner. Suddenly realised, right, he's got lightning fast pace, and then of course his feet, and we've seen his touching around the goal for such a big man. He's got this amazing sort of close touch. So when we talk about somebody that has it all the skills and athleticism, he has it, but that ingredient, that absolute sort of competitiveness and aggression, and that wee bit of dirt that he has in his game, he's a boy that's willing to sort of throw it in. You see these wee cheeky slaps that he sort of gets away with, and he's such a wonderful player. Nobody wants to be annoyed with him at all, but he does it. But all of that makes him the player that potentially, and again, injury, you never know what life brings, but potentially and hopefully we get to see this man, because he's only touching the start of his prime years.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The best rugby insight and analysis.
When you watch a guy, Ger, standing on the sideline counting players with his fingers, you know this is bullshit.
OTB Sports Rugby.
We talk about having to give Carberry and these players more time, but even if we give them more time, they're not going to hit the level that Johnny is hitting at and what he brings out of other players.
Subscribe to the rugby stream on the OTB Sports app now.
Things that put people off on a first date. Showing up late and getting your name wrong? Always a great start. Looking at their phone more than you? Hello? Someone who only talks about themselves. Oh, really? God, aren't you great? Look, no one said dating is perfect, but at GoDating.ie, we promise we'll always try and find your perfect match. Because somewhere out there, there's someone for you. And GoDating.ie will help you find them. Yes, even you, socks and sandals guy. Go on, go for it with GoDating.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette. Get into your flow with the new Gillette Labs Razor with exfoliating bar.
Right, 19 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTB AM. I'm delighted to say Daniel Lambert, who is the COO of Bohemians, is with us in studio. We wanted to get you in because you were tweeting last week about the current situation where a lot of 18-year-olds are joining League One clubs, and you had an idea about maybe how the league might counteract the issue of our best young players being sold for what seems like pennies on the dollar as opposed to fair value. And I just thought it would be interesting to have that conversation and start to learn a little bit about it. So can you talk to us maybe about what inspired you to put this out there? What was the bit where you think, okay, we need to have a conversation about this?
Yeah, I think, look, we've seen since Brexit, I suppose, that the important point before this is probably that, pre-Brexit, the best young players were leaving Ireland before they had any profile, I suppose. So you had junior clubs, St Kevin's, Joey's, Belvedere and others producing a lot of good young players, and they'd leave Ireland at 15, 16, 17 before they'd broken into League of Ireland teams at all, and they'd go in big numbers and we'd see them later on. So you'd either see them in two ways: players who'd returned home, and there's a lot of them who come and play in the league, or players who made it over there and then you see them at a later age. But now we're seeing that, with Brexit, that players are breaking into League of Ireland teams, making a big impact. They're on our radars, and then we're losing them quite quickly. And I suppose there's no, the Irish League isn't going to compete with the UK in terms of quality of football or the wages that it can offer, that's for sure. And we can get a lot better, and we should. And it's not unusual that a young player will want to leave, but I think that there are at times release clauses, and it's not exclusively that. We should say at Bohemians we had 2 players with release clauses who've left recently, but it seems to be a problem for every club, not just for one. It's not wholesale, but we've seen a lot of players move with clauses recently, and I think that the league clubs can cooperate and act in a way that removes that as an option. And it will still mean players will leave, but there'll be, I suppose, a fairer fee paid, and we need that to happen as we invest in academy systems. And ultimately, look, the international teams' fortunes are now heavily tied to the League of Ireland, because I'd say they're one and the same. League of Ireland clubs will develop all our international players as we move forward, and we have to ensure that we're in a best position to do that.
That's all the more reason for the clubs to get good funding from the best players who get transferred, as opposed to going away cheap. Can you just explain how the release clause actually works? So not a specific example of any of your players, because we're not looking for you to breach confidentiality or whatever, but in principle, why are there release clauses? Why did the clubs agree or feel like they need to agree to a release clause? Who's putting the release clause in, and what kind of percentage or money do you think, how does it work? Because it's something that people don't know about.
It'll work where you have a young player, let's say at any League of Ireland club, maybe age 17, 18, who's beginning to break into a first team. Obviously the players may be shown a lot of potential, and an agent will look to insert a release clause that will specify a price that the player can leave the club. And I suppose there's been an investment in the past. We have full-time head of academies now, lots of clubs, we've one at our own club, we're developing better facilities, so there's a big investment gone into a large group of players over a long period of time to develop players in all parts of the game, and might end up as coaches, League of Ireland players, or play internationally. But they look to insert these clauses at that point, and I suppose the rationale is that if you don't agree to it, they may move to another League of Ireland club. They're not at the point where the player is in demand in the UK or anything like that, so they're showing potential and they may or may not move, but it puts pressure, I suppose, on one club where they need to keep the player's becoming an important part of the squad, or is becoming an important part, that the risk is that they go to another club who'll agree to a release.
The best young Barcelona players have just signed, the 3 Brazilians have just signed Real Madrid new contracts, and the release clause is 500 million and $1 billion and $1 billion, and you're like, okay, this is all ridiculous. I suspect the release clauses, the numbers are weighted in favour of the agent being able to phone a club in England and say, I can get you this player, he's clearly worth a load more than this, but the release clause is it 10, 15, 20, 25,000? Are they the figures we're talking about?
No, for us they would be much higher than that, to be fair, but I think that we've seen, our players are in demand. If you think of someone like Evan Ferguson's probably the best example from Bohs in the last couple of years. Made his Premier League debut last year, came on against Burnley for Brighton, 17 years old. We look at players who've gone over. Georgie Kelly will play in the Championship this year. So our players are in demand because they're good players. We've really good players coming from the country, and we're developing better players all the time, I think. So they wouldn't be that low, but I still think they aren't obviously at market value. And the idea here isn't to...
How much below market value are they? Just to give people an idea of what we're...
It might be 50% below, might be 100% below, so you might be getting maybe half what you think you should get. And I just think that it's so important that
could pay for 4 staff, or that could pay for 5 more players to come in to help the first team, which will make more people want to come and see the team, which kind of builds the momentum, right? So it's not catastrophic, but it's a huge amount of money that we're talking about in terms of overall revenue.
Yeah, and it shouldn't, the idea here isn't if a young player wants to progress, no League of Ireland club blocks the progression of a player. And everybody wants to see an individual reach their potential. So I think ultimately, if we command better fees, the player, the agent himself, the clubs, there aren't really any losers to it. It's just to ensure that we get to a point where we're getting market value for the players.
Okay, so what you had asked for in your tweets last week was that the League of Ireland clubs would come together and act in concert. So a huge amount of young players are now moving from the League of Ireland to League One in particular. It's an obvious result of Brexit. Previously scores went annually at younger ages. Now they've entered League of Ireland teams, and you can roll that on there. and are visible and delivering impressive performances. The balance has shifted from large numbers of unknown talent to a smaller number of older proven talent. Clubs are getting better add-ons, but we need to collectively improve the upfront fees being achieved. And so the impediment to fees are agent get-out clauses. These can be counteracted by clubs having a collective agreement to set a certain level where no club breaks it and delivers higher fees for all. That's the bit here that's most contentious or most ambitious, depending on, like, can the clubs agree that they're going to work together for everybody's benefit? Do you think they can?
I think they can, yeah. I think, look, we need to, I suppose, like, as we progress here, we're talking about the FAI. I've obviously moved the underage academy system into League of Ireland clubs. There's been brilliant developments we've seen, and there will be a lot more developments in terms of infrastructure by all clubs in the next couple of years. And I think it's essential that we, as a league, cooperate off the pitch to make the pie bigger for everybody, really, to improve our league. It is the case. Does football reach its potential in this country? It really doesn't. I grew up playing GAA. The GAA, I think, does reach its potential. And you go and you see an All-Ireland final, you see an inter-county game in really good facilities. But League of Ireland, we have the participation numbers. There needs to be multiple approaches. It includes government investments in stadia. We visited Union Berlin 2 weeks ago and they showed us their new academy, which has been built, 50% funded by the German government. And this makes sense on lots of levels because it enables a better team, national team. It allows more players to progress and reach their potential. It allows fans, coaches, players, staff to have a better experience of football in Ireland. And this is just one part of that. But I really do think that, where League of Ireland clubs have been in the past and where they'll be in the next 10 years are really poles apart, because we are going to develop the best young players. So
what needs to happen for the clubs to all come together? Is there a simple mechanism for this where everybody says we're going to agree to this and it's not like written in stone, or do you feel it needs to be like a kind of League of Ireland charter where everybody signs up and says we're going to try and increase everybody's value, the value of everybody's playing stock, and the way we're going to do that is multifaceted. We're going to lobby government for funding, for resources, not just for stadiums, but also for staff and investment at that level. But equally, we're going to make sure that we charge the right price for our players. Will everybody sign up for that?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be a charter. I think a clever strategy and a thought out strategy is needed for things like government investment, which is obviously part of the FAI strategy. But I think when it comes to something like an agreement like this, I think it can be done. There's a forum called the PCA, the Premier Clubs Alliance, where we meet kind of every 2 weeks. And I do think it does require a level of trust, obviously, because if it's a case that Club A is talking to an agent and agrees that they aren't going to agree to a release, that they need to be confident that Club B and C will do likewise. So it does require maybe a degree of trust that hasn't been demonstrated in the past, but I don't think that's to say it can't be in the future. Okay.
What was the feedback like from people who saw your idea out there? Are people generally broadly in favour of it?
Yeah, well, obviously the people who contacted me were, because that's naturally what happens, I suppose. Several clubs contacted to say that they were interested in this, that they would like to discuss it. So I think it'll definitely be discussed, hopefully. But like I said, this is just one part. It's something that we've seen. We saw several examples from several clubs in the past 12 months, and to me, it's quite an easy fix. And again, it's not to say that this is in any way detrimental to a player's development. It isn't. Players will develop and will move.
Well, the other thing is that the quality of player has been clearly demonstrated over the last 5-10 years in particular, where the older players who go over are making first team debuts much quicker than the ones who went over. Obviously that it's fairly natural that they'd be further along, but it's not a barrier anymore to playing in the League of Ireland to go to play in League One or the Championship.
No, it's not at all, and actually it's much better for player welfare. Like, we've heard stories and we've all seen it at clubs. Anyone who's worked at a club, you get young players who've come back, who've maybe spent 4, 5, 6 years in the UK. They've forgotten education in terms of leaving cert, and it can be difficult if you don't make it in the game to come home where you've missed a key part of your life's development. Now they have the opportunity to finish their education, to stay in Ireland, and then to move at 18 with much better opportunities, and to have an actual affinity to a League of Ireland club. So if it doesn't work out, to come back and maybe slot back into a system and to a culture and an environment that you're familiar with. In the past, somebody who left a junior club, they mostly had no involvement or exposure to a League of Ireland club. But the fundamental point here, I suppose, is that if we are to develop players, top players, we have to ensure that we have systems and processes and infrastructure and facilities to enable that. And that will only come about through more revenue coming into the league, and there's several ways that can happen. I think things like a broadcast deal or large commercial agreements, they're on the wish list, but ultimately they'll probably come after stadia development, whereas this is something that can be fixed quite rapidly without huge infrastructure, improvements. It can happen through an agreement, through a conversation.
Yeah. Owen?
Daniel, when it comes to the interest in players in the League of Ireland right now, it seems from the outside looking in that there is just kind of more of a global or a continental feel to clubs that are interested in League of Ireland players, people going beyond just Ireland and the UK. Is that the reality inside in the league from your own perspective?
Yeah, well, from players going out, we've like the Brexit rules mean that a player you can move at 16 to the continent, while you have to wait till 18. So that's why you've seen, I suppose, a number of players move recently to the continent. And when you speak to heads of academy at the moment, some do say that there are certain really high potential players who would benefit from a move to an environment that's perhaps a better environment, a more advanced environment, as we seek to reach the same stage. In terms of players in, obviously we brought a player in yesterday from Germany. I do think the league, historically, there's been kind of two-way movement. It's players coming from the UK and vice versa, and I think that we do need to look at other markets. It's obviously been down to cultural and language kind of reasons in the past, but I don't think that that's a reason to not look at other markets, and we should look both ways.
When you bring a player in from Germany, how much work and scouting goes into that move?
Obviously, look, you've got analysts there's things, a lot of systems now, Huddle and Wisecout and other programs that clubs are using globally, and you can do quite a lot of work without travelling. In terms of bringing somebody in, then it's really about them being comfortable moving into a new environment. The player we brought in yesterday was really interested in Ireland. He speaks good English. He wanted to come here, and I think that's important because it is a shift. And we have had players in the past at Bohs who've moved to places where they do find it's culturally a difficult fit, especially around language. So.
Could the FAI have a role in brokering this agreement between the clubs?
I don't think so. I don't actually think it's an FAI issue, to be honest. I think the FAI, they administer the league, they promote the league, but something like this really, I think, is outside of their remit.
Okay, and probably better if the league clubs start cooperating and driving initiatives like this without waiting for the FAI to take the lead on it.
Yeah, definitely. And the FAI have taken the lead on a lot of things. Like the move to academy football has been excellent. There's been a lot of new staff come in. There's a proper league office at the moment, and the FAI strategy, was badly needed, and there's some really good things in there. But I do think that fundamentally, we mentioned it earlier, but when we look at Tallaght Stadium as an example, and the crowds that Shamrock Rovers have gotten recently, that's a municipal stadium. It makes a lot of sense. It's what's to be delivered for Dalymount, and there'll hopefully be more news on Dalymount shortly. But we look at stadia around the country. It's a simple model. These aren't hugely expensive stadia. We're talking about, Derry cities, I think, had public investment as well. So if you take that you've had, Tallaght and Derry as two, you can have 8 more stadia in the Premier League. We're not talking about hundreds of millions of euros here. I think with, perhaps 10 million for each, you could do quite a big improvement. Some of them are in better condition than others. Dalymount's quite poor. But we have seen, Richmond Park, you've seen it in Talca Park, you've seen it in Dalymount, you've seen crowds grow, and they're growing with facilities that are below par. And that aren't what people should experience for the most part, with some exceptions. You
talked about the academy system really working. We're starting to see the fruits in the international team. I think the quality of football that we're seeing from our young players, and the fact that some of the best clubs around Europe are now picking our 16-year-olds would all suggest that everything is going in the right direction. And yet there does still seem to be this kind of faction within the schoolboy clubs who are looking at the League of Ireland clubs going, what's going on here? Why have we been left behind? Does that manifest itself at all on a day-to-day basis, or is that exclusively in the committee rooms of the FAI where that kind of stuff actually has an impact?
Yeah, I don't think it manifests itself hugely, and you'd have to be sympathetic, and you'd have to understand, I suppose, the position of a junior club who perhaps have developed players for 50, 60, 70 years, and would have had, I suppose, underage coaches there that were probably the most qualified coaches in the country. It was a difficult move. I do think having a football pyramid, from top to bottom, makes an awful lot of sense for the game. And I suppose in any change, some people end up in a better position and some people end up in a worse position. But I do think that you have players developed through League of Ireland clubs. We had a system prior to that where you sort of had 2 silos. You had a pyramid that was the men's senior game, which has now thankfully become men's and women's, and then you had junior clubs, and there wasn't any crossover really, unless players were returning back. So I can understand frustrations there, but I really do think that move was a really good move. And
has it worked itself out? Because it feels even just reading Dan McDonald's piece yesterday about the FAI AGM this year, that there's still simmering discontent, and it hasn't quite gone away with the DDSL going back to winter football. It's like it's just little pockets who are kind of interested in the status quo, or trying to re-establish the status quo, when actually it seems like the status quo didn't work for us at all.
Yeah, and I think, look, when you make a big change, there'll always be some people, I suppose, who are unhappy and will try to return to the previous position. I don't think that will happen in this case, and I do think things like alignment of seasons are really important for player development and to enable, aligned transfer windows, to enable, just alignment across the board in terms of players moving from one level to another, or from, and that can be either way. So I think you'll probably see a period of time where there still is some of that, but hopefully it will then kind of fizzle out. It doesn't really impact us in terms of a League of Ireland club, but you do you know, you'll hear other people's opinions, you'll read about them, and you maybe hear them from other meetings. And you know, I can see the position that someone would be in there, but I do firmly believe, and I think it goes without saying, that like that system of a pathway from a young age up makes a lot of sense.
Well, it's the only way forward, really.
Yeah, it is.
So overall, it sounds like you're quite confident about the future of the league, enthusiastic about the future of the league. Is that fair? Because there's definitely been periods of time in the past where it was less coherent. It was less. It was more fractured, and it looked like cooperation of the type you were talking about would have been almost impossible. So it feels like maybe we're entering a new era.
Yeah, I think we definitely are. Look, I think, you know, we've mentioned the FAI, the changes that have happened there. It's obviously going to be a long road for the association given the level of debt that they have, but there's been really good people have come in. You know, they have clear plans and they're working to, you know, a plan that makes sense to clubs for the most part. You know, you can always have improvements in terms of promotion of the league, but I do think that just if you simply look at clubs and look at the number of staff they have at Bohemians, you know, we'd one member of staff who was Lynn is with Bohemians 40 years this year, and that would have been our, you know, non-playing side of the club. You know, in the office now we've kind of 4, 5, 6 staff, you know, between full and part-time, and likewise many other clubs you've seen people come in full-time, COOs, CEOs, you know, commercial people at all clubs. And I think that you know, has obviously led to a professionalisation amongst clubs and, you know, more cooperation off the pitch. So I do think we're going in the right direction, but the big elephant in the room is stadia. It's the one that everyone points to, but it really needs to happen, because without that you can get to a certain level. Like, we're sold out every game, which sounds great, but it's awful because a lot of young kids can't come to Diarmuid, new families have moved to Phibsborough, people who want to come and can't, and that's a bad thing. But it's happening at a lot of grounds. It's not just Diarmuid that's sold out. So we do need to improve upon that quite quickly, and from that flows so many other things, not just revenue.
Yeah, but the revenue allows everything else to happen. So it's kind of it is chicken and egg. So what's the big block on that? Is it that the government haven't quite fully understood the opportunity that's there with football, or why do you think we haven't had the investment that we should have had in those stadiums?
My own personal opinion is that football's fragmented in the country. You know, I think if you're, you know, a politician and you look at the GAA and you have the parochial model, you probably have quite a formulated ask from a local TD. You know, and all politics starting locally, maybe even at councillor level. Whereas in football, you tend to have in any area a multitude of clubs. So you take an area like I grew up in Finglas, and I think there was 40 teams. My dad ran one of them, you know, and he had a one-team club, and they play in a park and they operate over a porta-cabin, and they're lobbying the local guy for, you know, another porta-cabin. And I think that unfortunately in football, maybe over time, that fragmentation has led to kind of a mixed messaging for politicians, and that needs to be more formulated, which is what the FAI are doing at the moment. And I do think that when you talk about a game with so many participants, to have a league in our country where, you know, you've great clubs with great histories, but playing in the stadium they are, it really is poor form. And part of that blame lies with the FAI, part of it lies with the clubs themselves. But I do think now, as we all look to move forward, that, you know, I think that some of that burden should shift to government, and the municipal model delivers a lot. You know, it's not just a football stadium. You know, you can have integrated community facilities, and it can be used for other events. So
yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. Vinnie Perth has talked about, you know, in Tallaght there's like 4 different facilities all getting maybe 50 grand or 100 grand in grants, but actually if that was one facility it would be absolutely amazing and all 4 clubs could be run out of it. They would just have to share it, and that's the bit of cooperation that maybe is easier in a GAA club, because you go, well, that's your territory and that's your territory and that's it, and nobody else is allowed to set up there, whereas actually anybody can set up a football club really if they want, and make that application. So that's a long hard road. But in terms of Diarmuid, how transformative would it be if you just had that facility functioning properly as a community amenity in Phibsborough, but also a great place to go and watch football?
You couldn't overemphasise the change that would make to the club, in terms of, like, you know, we've got about 60 playing teams now, boys and girls. So many of those kids can't come to games. As I said, you know, it even in a stadium where you don't have enough capacity, you've got a mix of groups that maybe shouldn't mix. You've got your singing section beside your family section, beside older people. It would be massive, and you know, it really is. I think we need to move away too from this model. We sometimes hear of like a $6,000 seater or an $8,000 seater. Like, other leagues are moving back to terracing. You know, you see it in the Premier League, you see it in the SPL. We went to Union Berlin 2 weeks ago, and there was 18,000 people at the game, and there was 15,000 standing. You know, and we need to get away from this idea that you need to bring in teams of architects and design something that looks amazing that's an all-seater, because very often as a football fan you want to be close to the pitch and you want to stand, where a large percentage of people do. So I don't think there needs to be huge cost to it. It just needs to be designed in a way that, you know, fans want to enjoy the game.
Yeah.
And then your facilities are multi-use, as you said, which is crucial, and you see it in other countries as well.
Yeah. Owen?
Daniel, do you know how many, what percentage of daily amount you'd actually be able to, or how many more tickets you'd be able to sell? What the estimate would be on revenue if there was a facility that was up to scratch and something that you feel you could get more people into?
Yeah, like we'd anticipate that our crowd would grow by about 70%. So if you took, say, 2,000 people per game, and this is just an average, obviously, if you look at something, I suppose, like the Bohs Rovers game, and you look at the number that arrives to Tallaght, and then what you can sell in daily amount, you can probably marry them too, but it is the derby. So if you say you take 2,000 people and you go at an average of, say, a €12 a ticket, you're talking about 45,000 a game, and then you multiply that out by your 20 home games, you're nearly $1 million a year. But that's just the ticket price. Obviously, when people arrive to a stadium, they buy food and drinks and jerseys and programmes, and they maybe experience the game, as a young child for the first time, and they return. So the actual, and then you bring into that commercial revenue, in terms of the visibility for commercial partners. Really it becomes it's massive, and like I said, we're seeing it. It's not just Bohs. We have seen many clubs this year sell out games, and while that's to be celebrated, it's an opportunity lost, really.
The other thing is the atmosphere creates this momentum behind the league that then becomes unstoppable. If the atmosphere is great at every game, then people want to go, and ticket prices can go up, revenue can go up. Of
course,
people don't mind that because it becomes an experience. And I'm not advocating for higher ticket prices, but you know what I mean, there's like an opportunity there.
I think it really brings in the broadcast deal as well, because you saw, I suppose, last year when we played in Europe, we played 3 games in the Aviva, brilliant games, brilliant occasion, especially coming out of COVID. But visually, when you look at those games, the stadium sets the stage, I suppose. So while the players are the same and the game, maybe of the same quality, it appears in a very different light. And I think that's a really fundamental piece as well, that with better facilities, I think TV replays your promotion of the league visually, and if you're behind visually in the social media age, it just doesn't marry.
So what's your ambition for a broadcast deal? What's the best case scenario? What would you like?
Well, it needs to bring in revenue. Like, at the moment, I think games in the league over the past, as long as I've been involved, really what the benefit to a club is that it benefits your commercial partners. It may actually hit your ticket sales a bit, so there's no actual financial element really. LOITV has come in, obviously during COVID, and was great for people, but I don't think that that's a long-term solution. A paper game streaming service, for me isn't the answer. But it's totally understandable too from a broadcast perspective. The figures aren't there. The figures have been released by RTE, and for the most part they don't justify a large amount of games, and they certainly don't justify payment.
Yeah, the only thing about that is that, like, if you put a game on now and then no other game for 5-6 weeks, and then no other game for 5-6 weeks, and then 2 together, how does anybody build up a sense, okay, this is an appointment to watch? Mm-hmm. Like, TV viewing is about habits. You can't put one-off games on and go, well, this didn't work. That always seemed a little bit like a handy excuse to me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And look, there's nobody who'd love a game on each week more than me, but I do think, like I said, it's probably a process, and things like a proper broadcast deal probably is at the end of our process, where we have 10 stadiums that can hold between 5,000 and 8,000 each, that visually look good, and with more people going in more communities, which will naturally happen with attendances, then there's a greater interest anyway, so the TV numbers would rise. The actual spectacle of the game would be on a par with other games that you'd expect to see in other sports, but we're at that kind of point where the stadium issue is a handicap for all clubs, bar 1 or 2, and we have models there. As I said, we've seen in Tallaght what a municipal stadium can do in terms of driving up attendances and creating a stadium that, while it's a little bit outside the city, looks amazing, has a big capacity, and it's a place that people want to go.
100%. Well, Daniel, best of luck with all of it, and thanks a million, because it is really interesting, that notion that maybe cooperation could help to raise the revenue that we're getting for players, because we all want that to happen, and the higher value that the players have sometimes actually makes it easier for them when they get there, that the pathway to the first team is like, oh, we've got to put you in here, we've got to give you a chance because we paid some money for you. So thanks a million for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem.
It's 8:43 this morning. OTB AM brought to you live each morning by Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. Up next, sports news with Mullaney. Before that, here's the lads in the news round last night talking about how it could have been a different story for Kerry had Conor Callaghan been fit for Dublin in the semi-final.
Yeah, well, the good managers don't wait around, sure they don't. No. And he really has delivered for Kerry on so many occasions, Jack O'Connor, and it's often in the aftermath of a really humbling defeat to Tyrone in 2004 off the back of that All-Ireland semi-final in 2003 and 2009 after they were beaten by Tyrone in the 2008 final. And now again, after their semi-final loss last year, Jack O'Connor comes in and they win an All-Ireland in the following season. And they were most people's favourites from the very beginning of the year. They have gone through the season unbeaten, apart from that league game against Tyrone, which was a dead rubber from their point of view. Defensively, he's transformed them. I think they conceded 2 goals in play through the McGrath Cup, the Munster Championship, the League and the All-Ireland Championship, which is extraordinary, given it was a Kerry team that was being suckered by really bad goals, conceding at big moments in games over the last couple of years. So that they continue to improve defensively. We heard from Graham O'Sullivan there. I mean, if it wasn't for the likes of McDade and the other 2 scorers in chief, he was up there for the Man of the Match award. A phenomenal display from cornerback, capped by a brilliant score himself, and he assisted a couple of points as well. So Jack O'Connor seems to have improved them all around. Overall, though, I still look at Clifford and I think if you don't have that guy, you don't win the All-Ireland. And if Conor O'Callaghan plays against you in the semi-final, you don't win the All-Ireland either. So they're worthy champions and they will improve because they've got this 8-year monkey off their backs and they've now come through at the death in 2 huge games. That will bring them on massively. But they're not runaway favourites in anyone's eyes, I would imagine, for next year's championship either, which is great. And I just was tweeting earlier, for the 4th decade running, the first 3 All-Irelands of the new decade have been won by 3 different counties. And I mean, that's refreshing off the back of Dublin's dominance for so long, that we have Dublin, we have Tyrone, we have Kerry winning the first 3 All-Irelands of this decade. And perhaps Galway, if they can kick on the back of what they've achieved this year, they'll be best placed to maybe make it 4 different teams in the first 4 years of the decade, which would be great.
Dave McIntyre there, making the case that maybe Con would have changed things in the semi. We'll see next year, hopefully. Patrick McHugh says Drogheda United have lost 3 players last season to Palace, Blackburn and Bolton. They're playing first team now and we got absolute peanuts. Killian Phillips with Palace has a sell-on fee. And Peter M says 6,400 people all sitting at Cork City versus Galway in the First Division 2 weeks ago. New record attendance for the First Division. Carl, you're a League of Ireland fan?
I am. Well, a relatively recent convert now, I would have to admit, but yeah, I take an interest.
Well, the league needs recent converts. If ever there was a bandwagon required, the League of Ireland needs one, because the more people who go to games and the more people who show up and have an opinion and help.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been delighted to take an interest in it. I grew up from a GA background, so I was very much focused on that. But having taken an interest in it, it is a very kind of niche market. But I have noticed in the last couple of years going to matches that there's a huge interest now in it, and the passion that people have in the League of Ireland for their local clubs or the clubs that they've tied themselves to is huge, and there's a endless amount of possibilities in the League of Ireland. And you look at the progress, like Sligo Rovers had a great result last week against Motherwell. St. Pat's, I was at that game at Richmond Park. They played Murrah, who beat Spurs in the Europa Conference League last. They played them off the park for the first half an hour. They got a 1-1 draw. So I mean, there's huge possibilities, and you're hopeful that Shamrock Rovers will be in at a minimum the group stage of the Europa Conference League. And I guess to people that are possible converts again to the League of Ireland in the coming years, having teams competing there will get people to sit up and notice.
Yeah, and I look, if Dalymount was fixed, then all of a sudden there are endless possibilities for them. If Dalymount and Tolka were both fixed, then I think you could see a rebirth. And the fact that so many of our young players are actually playing League of Ireland before they go off to England, and then they're making the Ireland team. There's a clear link. You know, Daniel talked about the football pyramid. It's fairly obvious. We haven't had one. Now we have one. Yeah. It's starting to bear some fruit. We just need to stay the course and hope that the FAI can fix their issues, because they still haven't got a sponsor for the main men's national team. You know, it's not a great scenario they find themselves in.
But I think the positivity around the league has been pretty significant in the last kind of 2 years, 18 months kind of thing. And even on social media now, I know Daniel mentioned there LOI TV and stuff like that, but just having clips of games and you see the various bits of skill and good goals and stuff like that is invaluable, just to get a reach to kind of maybe the younger population as well, to let them know, hang on a second, it's not all about what's happening across the water. There's actually a local club close to you that's producing top quality players,
and that hopefully is going to have a good atmosphere and reasonable facilities, so that when you go, you don't feel like you're like a third world citizen or a sports citizen anyway. What's going on in the world?
Well, we'll start with Gaelic games. James McCartan has stepped down as manager of the Down senior footballers. A 2-time All-Ireland winning player with the county. He took charge for the second time ahead of this season, but Down suffered relegation to Division 3. They made an early exit from the Ulster Championship and from the Tailteann Cup as well. In his previous stint at the helm, McCartan guided his native county to the All-Ireland final of 2010. The Meath County Board, meanwhile, is set to officially confirm the appointment of Colm O'Rourke as their new manager tonight. The Screen native won 2 All-Irelands as a player with the Royals, and he's poised to take charge of an inter-county side for the first time. O'Rourke has been involved at club level in Meath, guiding Simonstown to 2 championship titles.
Tommy Rooney is excited. That's all you need to know. The arrow is pointing up. And I can see why. It's like, he's been finally getting his opportunity. If he puts the right backroom team in, there's no reason why Meath couldn't be on the fringes of Division 1 and therefore capable of causing some trouble to big teams.
Yeah, and I think Liam Hayes made the point on Off the Ball last night that Meath are one of the counties you would hope, with their population and the tradition and history that they have, that they should be competing at that upper level. And I think Colm O'Rourke is the kind of person that would galvanise the support, the passionate support that Meath have, and he'd be hopeful of an upturn in fortunes there, certainly. We
were chatting a bit about Desi yesterday. Conor McKeown has this story in the back of the Herald today that there's been no official review of the season between the relevant parties just yet. Wildfire rumour in the capital over the weekend suggested that not only was Farrell's departure imminent, but that the county board had already moved to put in place a new management team. As yet, that has not happened. So there's been no indication from either Farrell or the county board as to whether or not he's going to be back in 2023. I suspect they want to move relatively quickly to get that speculation done and dusted. But it is also the type of thing where the Dublin County Board will not do anything until everything is in place and they know exactly what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, like that. And for me, when you're an inter-county manager at this point, you're probably thinking, I need to get out to club games, I need to be watching players right now, and I need to be kind of in the hot seat and ready to go already. So if there's going to be a change, it kind of needed to be made. It needed to be made yesterday, you would have thought, given how long they've been out of the championship now. Although it's only 2.5 weeks at this point, so maybe it just feels a little bit longer. But yeah, they want to be getting it done quite quickly at this point, because I just think that the club season now, it's obviously going to be a key facet of the whole setup. So I don't know. I think Desi Farrell obviously has an All-Ireland medal. He's got that to his credit. Does he? Is it his decision?
It seems to be his decision. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought so. So, you'd like to think that they'll have some sort of the rumours were mad. You were saying on the show yesterday that there was a specific event that was the petrol behind the whole thing.
Yeah, the New York fundraiser in Croker. I think it's just a lot of GA people came together at the weekend of the All-Ireland very giddy and started to gossip. That's basically what happened.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. We haven't seen any other appointments yet. But there was some wild gossip. The gossip didn't even include Colm O'Rourke.
No.
It included some other stuff.
Although Tommy did tell us afterwards he'd heard it on Saturday but didn't believe it. I'm like, well, that's not much use to us after the event. I mean, he'd obviously forgot his scoop hat. He'd left it at home.
Is it a good I can't believe it or a bad I can't believe it?
It's obviously good now. He's excited. Okay. There's one other quick story that I think we should be talking about on the back of the London Times today. The families of 9/11 victims have accused live golf players of lacking courage and living under a rock as they prepare to protest at this week's Saudi-backed tournament at Donald Trump's Bedminster course in New Jersey. This is interesting because this is a ratcheting up of pressure.
Yeah, it certainly is. And they've, I think Phil Mickelson has had to apologise to them as well, hasn't he? Or he certainly addressed it earlier on this year as well. This is just a story that rumbles on and it's not going to go away anytime soon. And there's also Sergio Garcia has rolled back on his decision to resign from the DP World Tour. He's going to cling on in the hope that he might be eligible for the Ryder Cup down the line, which is interesting on the back of the Stenson news.
Oh, so now he's like, actually I could be captain now.
Possibly.
I don't need the money. When I said that your tournaments were crap and that you were all horrible golfers, I meant that your tournaments were really good and I really respect you all as people.
Yeah. I think the Ryder Cup have to take a very definitive stance in that they probably will appoint a captain this week, and I would suspect if it's the likes of Thomas Bjorn that there'll be a fairly hardline stance towards the players that have gone to the Saudi Golf Series. And there was quite a bit of blowback towards Stenson last week, I thought, and probably justified in that he took that decision. And they have to take a strong stance.
I was reading too that a bunch of golfers who made the first live tournament, who actually did quite well, weren't invited back for the second one. So you want to be fairly certain that if you're resigning or leaving, that you're in for good with Live Golf, because they're like, well, actually, we can just cut you now. You know?
Yeah.
Great that you were there the first week, and well done in finishing third and winning 600 grand, which was the most money you've ever made in your life. But we don't really. Who are you? I mean, sorry, we don't even know who you are. So off you go. We've got some famous people coming in.
Yeah, but there probably is also a degree that they would have to show some sort of loyalty to these players who took a huge gamble in going to Live Golf at a time when it wasn't certain.
They're the type to show loyalty?
I don't, but they probably should, to be fair to them, because there's virtually no danger now to go into Live Golf, really, because it's established itself, which is kind of worrying from an overall point of view. But the world ranking points is going to be the big decision, I think, whether they can get some world ranking points and then the qualification for major championships and stuff like that. But the Ryder Cup stuff this week is going to rumble on, I think.
All right. Anything else going on?
Well, that story about Sergio Garcia, just to mention Shamrock Rovers against Ludogorets tonight, 8 o'clock kick-off at Tallaght Stadium. Shamrock Rovers trailing by 3-0. The first of the semi-finals as well at the Women's European Championships. England against Sweden, Bramall Lane, the venue for that one at 8 o'clock. And of course the Galway races continue this evening. The action underway at Ballybrit from 5:10.
Okay. Oh, and any sense of the Kerry footballers showing up at the Galway races? Maybe bring the cup up for a little tour?
That would just not be a good idea. I would not be. No chance. Like, is the Galway races actually like that? That would have just been that the universe would have exploded had Galway won the All Ireland and the Galway races was on this week. So maybe
Thursday or Friday. It's too early in the week, but maybe Thursday or Friday. I think they'd be welcome. I think they would be welcome because it was such a good final. There was no row. There was nothing. No reason for them not to.
Yeah, that was actually strange. It's the first final in a while where there was no rows. So yeah, maybe there would be, but I'd be very surprised if that happened. Like, first of all, Kerry have 2 captains. They've got a couple of more places to go to over the next 2 nights. I think it's Tralee tonight again. They like that to Aston Stacks and then Kenmare, and then there's talk of like Dingle, and I'm sure Foster will probably get there with the Day in the Sun with the 2 Cliffords as well. So
and then
they've got a lot to do.
Yeah, all right. Kevin Walsh is with us this morning. Kevin, good morning to you. How are you getting on? You can hear us all right, Kevin, can you?
Morning.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks. There's the line is just coming through there. The as Owen says, the universe would have exploded if the races were on and Sam Maguire had been there at the same time.
Yeah, it would be very hard to manage through them, but look, we had plans in place, so we'd have no problem with it. But yeah, it's just a bit disappointing we didn't have it to go with the races. And years gone by, I suppose people, and particularly the players, were always mind themselves from race week, and this was an ideal week to celebrate something if they'd won it, but unfortunately it wasn't to be.
Was there a point in the game where you thought, actually, you know what, we might get this done?
So, can you hear me there, Ger?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, was there a specific point in the game where you did allow yourself to believe that actually Galway were going to win?
I suppose when it came back from 16-14 to 16-all, I think it was around the 63rd, 64th minute, it was anyone's game at that point. So, but look, it was an open game. It was a game that could have gone either way. I suppose at the end of the day, maybe the subs had a huge impact from Kerry, where our own bench wasn't as strong as you'd like it to be, and Kerry kind of pulled away in the end. But look, it was there for us. It was there right through the game, and it was up and down. I think it was 6 times it was level. So it wasn't the case that it was never there for us, but it just wasn't to be in the day.
Kevin, why was it an open game? Because everybody in the build-up was saying expect a cagey affair where both defensive systems really come out on top. What happened that allowed the whole thing to break free?
I think I'm not so sure it broke free, but it was far more open than a few more games. But I would say that the stall was set out fairly early, where Kerry in particular, we say, threw a few high balls in early. I think they probably did go after maybe the full back line and the goalkeeper for Galway, which wasn't tested against Derry. And I think once those few kicks went in and out fairly early, that kind of bet the blanket defence a bit earlier. And then from the Kerry side, I felt that, I did say last week in the build-up to it, I still don't think they're there in relation to getting the sweeper right. It was fierce open, particularly for, and Shane actually had a great game, obviously, but he was given hand passes in front, bounce passes in front, which wouldn't happen normally with a tight defence. So I'd say it just was that bit more open, where it wasn't, I suppose, the defences weren't given that chance to set up more as much as the last semi-finals and stuff.
Because that Kerry defensive system, it seemed, in the first couple of plays of the game, was going to be under severe pressure from Galway. Like, I think they got to grips with Galway, or maybe Galway started doing something different. What was your read on that, Kevin? Because it looked like Galway were going to break with the tradition of Kerry giving up maybe like 1 or 2 goal chances in this game.
Yeah, my reading on it, to be honest with you, I was looking at it from high up in the stand. And I thought that Kerry, to be honest with you, whether it was part of a plan or they decided to go after Galway, but they certainly didn't have the back protected. And I know Morley would be the sweeper all the time, but there was certainly no sweeper in front of those stinky little passes. And it was wide open for her. I could see it. So it was a lovely kind of a game for the likes of Shane to get there, because he went into full forward quite a bit, and he was receiving balls in the middle 3 lanes, which would be, I suppose, defensively you wouldn't be overly happy with that. So there was straight runs, which didn't take a whole pile to have to manoeuvre around defences. So look at Kerry, I suppose they pushed up in the middle third, but they definitely did leave the back open for the likes of Shane inside. I think they probably tightened up. I noticed that after 25 minutes or so, where excuse me, Stephen O'Brien actually ended up back doing a little bit of sweeping, but it wasn't an out Tyke Morley all day in the first 25 minutes or so. But I think they did start to cover up the back a bit more after that.
We actually have a clip from GEA Sense on Twitter that we can run out. So the score was 15-14 at this stage, and Galway had a bit of an overlap. This is from the side camera, where it's just a Galway kick out that Kerry actually get a handle on, but then a multitude of Galway footballers break forward, and unfortunately just the wrong action is taken. So it looks like Matthew Tierney has the ball and ends up they recycle, and a shot gets taken and it goes wide. But Johnny Heaney and Finian O'Lee are on the overlap on the inside. Was there just a sense maybe that Galway didn't quite fully realise the opportunity they had, that they could have been more killer instincts when it comes to going for goals for whatever reason?
Yeah, I actually remember that incident live. I obviously can't see it here at the minute, and I haven't seen it on television afterwards either. But I remember there was Johnny Heaney and one other at the time. I remember where there was an option, and I don't think it looked up. Was it Matthew Tierney that had the ball? Was it?
I'm pretty sure it was Matthew Tierney who had the ball. I think it's Finian O'Lee. Yeah. That was GA Sense on Twitter for the clip.
Okay, I have to see it. I have to see it again. But I actually remember one of those live where it was on. But I think it was probably, I'm not so sure, was it a belief of that, or was it just one of those situations where it wasn't seen, or like you said, was it just kind of going back and playing safe and holding on to possession? I have to see it again, to be honest. But look, I don't think it was down to that. I think if you look at, I noticed there maybe, if you look at it, I think it was 14 points each after 47 minutes or so. Now, that's quite high scoring if you look at it. But I think Galway didn't score for another 16 minutes. I think it was 63rd minute they scored, and again, and inside 30 seconds they got a second point to bring it back to 16-all, and that was the finish of it. So bar that minute of 2 points from 47 minutes on to 75 minutes, Galway didn't score in that period. And again, you'd have to maybe look at the bench and say, well, was the legs fresh enough? I thought Paul Connery would have moved in and on full forward there for 4 or 5 minutes, looking at it live. It looked like to me he was moving in, getting a break. And, at that point, you'd see, Kerry had more than gone off at half time. So they had fresh legs there at that point. So I suppose that you need to have your bench fairly loaded for an Ireland final day. And I'm not so sure that Galway believe in the full bench they had.
What was your take on the Damien Comer situation?
I know Damien found himself outside the defensive line quite a bit. Definitely, he was marked completely. I done an article on how he was marked against Derry. I spoke about how Rogers marked him not looking at the ball. Damien got loads of space where the defender didn't have a clue where the ball was coming from. This was different. Foley was right beside him, pulling at him all day. Never gave him an inch, and was seeing the man and seeing the ball, which is a huge difference. And I suppose Damien then found to get the ball in there early, or found it hard to get the ball in early, and found himself after making runs being out around the offensive line or defensive line for Kerry, which definitely didn't suit him. But look, just one of those games, I suppose, that he didn't get into it as much as he'd like. And I suppose if you could get Shane Welch and Damien fired on the one day, you had massive opportunities. But it was just one of Damien's days that was, I suppose, he was taken out of it.
Is there a responsibility on the team to try and find a way to get him into it, or is that because of the marking has been so? Like, I wonder, is there better ball that needs to go in? Do they need to take some risks to get him into the game? At the start of the second half, for example, he's 1-on-1. Do you just pump a few balls in and see if he wins 1 out of 3? that's break even because the damage that he can do is significant? Or do you not take that risk because the stakes get so high?
Look, the stakes are quite high, and I mean, just putting the ball in for the sake of putting it in and hope works out in from the centre of the field is probably not your best case scenario. But look, we've all seen Damien in the past, in particular back post. You take the ball down, down lane 1 or lane 5 on the sidelines, and 1 or 2 crossfield balls in the back post with Damien. That's his bread and butter. And anybody would find it really hard to work with him on that. And it wasn't a case that Kerry had 4 or 5 people in front of Damien or anything like that. But I thought there was definitely opportunities to take the ball down, as I said, on the sidelines and crossfield balls back post. The sweeper will be taken completely out, and Damien has a great pair of hands. So I didn't see any of that happening on the day. That was something that definitely I would have felt would have been a threat for 2 or 3 times. But back to your point, I suppose, the way the game is and how good people are at getting out with sweepers and moving forward, you just don't hoof ball in all day and hope it works out. But certainly 2 or 3 times it would be nice to see that.
Well, yeah, I realise that the risk, and so it's not a tactic, and you can't use it as like, oh, we're just going to lorry ball in. But to try and get one of your key players into the game in a way that's going to be meaningful, sometimes you need to take risks. And maybe it's not high ball, maybe it's something else, but some way to get Comer into the game at half time. It felt necessary if Galway were going to be able to win the game.
Yeah, and again, look at it, and it's not high. I know we talk about risk. It's not a case that everyone should be afraid to kick the ball in. That's not the case. I mean, we have to put it in at certain occasions, but there's ways of doing that. As I said, to the back post, the crossfield ball, and then definitely if it's a really tight mark going on. I mean, I spoke about this, the screening side of things. Yes, the other players can help the likes of Damien get involved, but again, particular from, if you look at, and this is, I suppose, the worrying point of it, other than Johnny Heaney, I think having 2 shots, 1 being blocked and not over the bar, I don't think any of our 4 forwards had a shot on goal other than Shane Walsh and Johnny Heaney maybe twice. And I suppose that is the worrying side of it. So if that's not happening, I suppose there could be another work, even to release the like to Damien Comer. And then again, Damien himself probably will look back on this and say that he did have the ball a few times, particularly in the second half, just on the outside of the offensive arc, where maybe he could have taken on the guy once or twice as well. So again, it seemed to be played at a low risk area, because Damien is quite strong and could afford probably to take on 1 or 2 guys a bit more often. But just on the day, it didn't happen.
And that's kind of like one of the really interesting ways that you kind of look at this game, because at halftime it felt the narrative was, Galway are in the lead, but everything has gone their way. Whereas I was kind of half thinking, well, Comer has barely kicked the ball. I think he touched the ball once. And then on top of that, their kickouts were an absolute disaster. So if you add those 2 things into the mix, and it's only a 4-point defeat, which is pretty flattering to Kerry in the end, like there are a couple of things that you come away from a Galway perspective and think, Jesus, that All-Ireland was there for them.
Absolutely. And again, and I hear talk about Kerry going on dominating football for the next number of years. That's because of the age profile. I don't see that. I mean, from what I saw from Kerry there was that they'll be quite happy to get over the line. And if you take into account the kick-out strategy looked to be very poor, we'll say there was 25 shots for Kerry, I think 25 shots for Galway on goal, 35 for Kerry. Kerry had 8 wides to 1, I think, at half time, or 7-1. But at the same time, Galway are right in that game. So you'd have to say that, and even with the bench, Kerry's bench made a big impact where Galway's didn't. And they didn't seem to, I suppose, believe they had an impact on the bench. So, you just wonder if the likes of a Peter Cook, a Tom Flynn, a Fintan Curran, Kieran Duggan, I don't know where them guys are at the minute, but you just wonder if the bench was loaded a bit stronger, particularly for the midfield area. Kerry had already moved their midfielders at half time, so there was fresh legs there. So it's just, if you're taking all those into account, and Kerry, they're flattered to get over the line with 4 points, you would, you'd say if just 1 or 2 more stood up, that was there for us.
Would you make that like a point of priority over the next couple of months to try and get at least one of those middle third players that you mentioned there back into the squad? Like, we're not privy to a lot of the conversations that have happened under Joyce and the reasons for some people not being there, but on the evidence that you saw on Sunday, would you make it your priority to try and get a couple of them back in?
I certainly would. I absolutely would. I mean, look at when I was there myself, I know, like the Sean Armstrong and guys like that had been, maybe 31, 32. I'd certainly be looking to see where we can improve, and whatever it takes to get, players that will do a job for you there, or maybe something like young lads coming through, whatever it's going to be. But there's certainly, you'd have to say that the bench probably wasn't loaded as much as you'd like it, in particular on the final day, where you have a huge pitch and that kind of stuff. And in particular where, as I said, Kerry their bench did make that impact. So, look, it's just a pity. And I know people say, that nothing to lose and the first time up there and that kind of stuff. But I mean, you have everything to lose. It's an All-Ireland final, and we don't know who or where and who will be there again. It could be the same two teams again, but we don't know. And you've got to make the best of every opportunity. So, look, it's still a learning curve. Jack Lynn stood up, which is great to see the young fella playing well. Kenny McDay.
Oh, the line has just gone. Yeah, so we get that line back, but that is interesting. I think it's a fair point. The two things there. You never know when you're going to get back, and there was a strong suggestion that this was going to be Conroy's last season because he's been around for so long. Kevin Walsh is back, so I may as well actually put that to you. Kevin, that's an excellent point you're making there about you never know when you're going to get back. Apparently Silk is going to go travelling for a year and Conroy might be finishing up, so it won't be the same team irrespective of what happens next season.
Yeah, look, there's always movements. I mean, every single year, regardless of what we think, but there's movements for every team. I'm sure Kerry have movements and Dublin movements next year, and God knows, Dublin may be getting one or two of their players back next year that will be big players as well. So every time you get an opportunity, it's not a case of, well, there's nothing to lose here. When you get to finals, there's everything to lose. So, and again, look, unfortunately, we've lost this one, but they've performed well. A few areas, the kick-outs need to improve. I suppose, like we spoke about, the middle area, we certainly need more options in that middle area, and get everybody you can to load your bench, because in the day, that loading your bench puts awful pressure on people that's playing as well, in a good way, because you're challenging each other every single night of training, and you're also, match time. Some people might say, well, you feel pressure. Players should be able to deal with pressure, and if there's someone looking over your shoulder that someone is going to come in because you're not playing too well, you're going to have to raise your game to 5%, and every time you have to raise it to 5%, and there's a bench behind you. I don't mean play out of fear here. I mean play out of respect for what's coming behind you, that you're going to drive on. And look at, as I said to you, from what I seen from the Kerry team the last day, albeit they're champions now, I wouldn't be saying at this stage they're going to go on and dominate football like Dublin did. I think there's plenty of phrases. I wrote an examiner last week as to why Galway should win this game, and I think if you look back on some of the points raised, I think it's relevant. So I would just say, look, it's a learning curve, but certainly get as many people in as many places as you can to be as competitive as you can.
One last thing, when the opportunities came in the second half, when they got back in front and when they got back level, was there a bit at that stage where actually the inexperience of the group told in that maybe they just didn't fully appreciate where they could damage Kerry, and they kind of fell back on being slightly conservative, when actually what the game needed from a Galway perspective at that stage was to really go for it and to just ratchet up the ante as much as you possibly could?
Yeah, and I suppose then you have to have the bodies to do that as well. So it's very hard to say from outside, but I don't know why Galway experience, because Kerry haven't that much experience either. I know they're Division 1 champions, but this is championship. So, and I suppose the experience Kerry had was, 15 minutes coming down the stretch against Dublin. You can use that two ways. You can say, well, Kerry got over the line and they were resilient, or you can say, you know what, this is the team that could be tested again in that last 15 minutes if you put the pressure, like you said, put the ante up. And again, that's one back on the legs in this. Is I'm not so sure that everybody had the legs to go and put the ante up, and that's where the bench will come in. That maybe the likes of runners and whatever, that they could actually put the pressure on, because at that stage you had two subs in for Kerry at half time. I think you had someone else sitting in on the 43rd minute. Paddy Clifford got off for a blood sub for about 4 minutes, got his break, he came back in, and where I think we only had one or two subs in. Not that early, but hadn't a huge impact.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, we'll leave it there. Good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
No problem, John. That's okay. Thanks so much.
Kevin Walsh giving us his thoughts from a Galway perspective on the All-Ireland football final. That's pretty interesting, Owen, to get that sense that that's one that they're going to feel they left behind.
Yeah, 100%. And this is not going to make it any easier for Galway as well. But I think that if they got to the same final next year, if they get another chance against Kerry next year, there's a chance Kerry might improve. Like, I definitely feel that the nervousness we're talking about earlier in the show, I think that might have been a factor, and they didn't play very, very well on Sunday. There's a chance that if they played each other next year, Kerry could play well, and you just don't know when this opportunity will present itself. The thing is, if we're talking about Kerry and how Tally's come in and had a great influence in year one, it does seem the transformation under Cian O'Neill at Galway has been pretty quick as well. I know that the Joyce on the sideline isn't new, but some of the backroom team that he's surrounded himself with is relatively fresh, and that's one of the real sources of encouragement that you'd think next year they could maybe edge forward again. It's just, are the other teams around them, are they going to race forward at a greater pace?
Yeah, and it's interesting that there was a list of players that Kevin could name off there who he thought would be able to have an impact from the bench. And so, there's no quick fix. There might be a quick fix to the issue of them not having enough strength and depth.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating internal political conversation as well. As I said, we're not quite sure the details of many of these departures, and I'm sure Joyce had to take a tough stand. And I'm not talking about any of the players necessarily that Kevin mentioned there. There's a whole line of other players that have departed the panel, and I'm sure part of that is the manager laying down the law and having everybody on side, and then to kind of not roll back from it, but to try and go back to some of those players to try and get them back into the squad could be a challenge. But that's the nature of management, and it just looks in that middle third that they could do with an extra player or two there. Yeah,
I think Tommy made the point that the team has transformed from the last Galway team who was in an All-Ireland semi-final, and that's just a couple of years ago. So there has been a huge turnover, and maybe they can go back to some of those and say, right, now you see what the standard is, but you see what the prize is too. Get on board. 0879 180 180, that's our WhatsApp number. You can always leave a comment on the YouTube stream. We're brought to you live each morning by Gillette Labs for an effortless finish to your day. Our OTB Sports Radio schedule today is really good. OTB Gold is Ronnie Delaney at 1 o'clock. Our classic episode of Dadcast. Owen Redden's career retrospective at 4. And Jerry Eisenberg talking about Muhammad Ali in exile from 6. And then Joe's back from 7 tonight with the show. You can follow us across our social channels, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure to download the OTB Sports app so you can listen to all of our sports content and analysis. We're back after the break with Alan Quinlan, back from New Zealand, live in studio, giving us his combined 15 from Ireland's historic tour victory. First, here's Liam Hayes talking about his old teammate Colin O'Rourke getting the senior football gig in Meath.
Years and more. I mean, we know each other a long time. I was able to say to him, what on earth are you managing Simonstown again for at your age? I mean, Christ, have you not more things to do with your life? And he volunteered very quickly, ego. He said, when you're offered a job, the ego kicks in and you say, I'll do a good job on that. And I'd say it was very much the same with me, to be honest with you. I think, this is a very important appointment. Everybody in Meath knows that. And Colin will know that and knew that better than anybody. It's an absolutely vital time in the history of the county. If they didn't make the right appointment, then Meath, could go, well, they've been going through the floorboards for a long time. And that's no disrespect to Mick O'Dowd or Andy McIntyre or people who were there before. They did their level best. But the county's record is that it's officially going through the floorboards and will be out of sight at some time in the near future if something is not done. So I think Colin was aware of that, Joe. And I think when people knocked on his door and he was asked to do the job, I think, like everybody else in Meath, if you felt you were up to it, I think he felt it was his duty to do it. And also he wanted to do it. It's an ego thing. I mean, you look at all the managers at county level. It's a privilege to manage a county at county level. I got to manage Carlow for 2 years, my dad's home county. And I remember walking around the training field some nights thinking, isn't this fantastic? There's only a few of them in the country. I may be Division 4 in Carlow, but, I love this job. And to manage a Meath for a Meath man is a very proud thing to do. And Colin is a very proud man. And obviously he just couldn't say no.
Yeah.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
This summer, we're bringing you double Koi gig.
I thought that was going to be a much tighter game.
I cannot tell you the audible gasps that there were in the press box yesterday. They looked as stunned as the team on the pitch did.
I thought that they were stronger than that. I thought that they were tactically more aware than that.
For the best insight and analysis from this summer's Euros, subscribe to the Koi Gig Pod on the OTB Sports app now.
OTB AM
with Gillette. Get into your flow with the new Gillette Labs Razor with exfoliating bar.
Right, Alan Quinlan is back from his trip. How was it?
It was excellent, Jerry. Yeah, it was superb.
Were you there when the chicken was being stolen at the end?
No, I wasn't. I was gone home. I was actually in that bar about maybe an hour before that, and
it looked like they were having a good time.
Yeah, they were. I was surprised. It was well, not surprised, but I was surprised maybe that all the New Zealanders, the All Blacks, were out as well. I know you have to have a few beers and you can't kind of wallow at home, but they were all seemed to be mixing and getting on fine.
Yeah,
and,
I did see some Justin Marshall footage as well later on where he was getting into it with some of the All Blacks.
Yeah, that was a Ger Eoin, which was I wasn't there for it. I was actually I went to the team hotel to meet Justin Marshall and Jeff Wilson because they were working with Sky, and we kind of collaborated on a few pieces for Sky New Zealand, Sky UK and Ireland as well, and so we'd been together a fair bit over the tour, so I went and met them there. It was a quiet little kind of hotel bar off just a block or two off the beaten track that, you know, there was no passing traffic there. Nobody really knew about it. The players were obviously, you know, in a way in their own kind of private room, and then they went out on the town, if you like. But so I was there about maybe 1:30, 2 o'clock, and with the Sky New Zealand guys, and we walked up to that bar. So I was with Justin Marshall for a good while before that, and I actually left my bag back in the hotel when I went into that bar. Mishmash it was called, and in Courtney Place in Wellington, and I went back to get my bag, and then I came back to the nightclub bar, whatever it was, and I just kind of decided against. I said it was around 3:30 in the morning. I had an early start. I was keen to see a little bit of I needed to get packed up anyway and stuff like that. So I went back to the hotel, and then I saw that the next day. But I don't know what happened. I think it was just a few verbals. But I kind of, you know, when I'm on the other side now, on the media side, I kind of feel that if I was in Justin Marshall's position of maybe critiquing, you know, his home team, like maybe I would have had to do, and talk about the disappointment of the losses, maybe that filters back to some of the New Zealand players as well. And I probably have experienced a little bit of that before when, you know, I criticised Munster, or if I criticised Ireland or something like that, which is, I feel a little bit for him because
he was doing his job.
Well, you can say 9 good things, Ger, about,
no one hears
about
them.
a team, and you say one bad thing and everybody hears it. And I think Ger Eoin would have been probably. It's a little bit like the Roy Keane, Paul Pogba stuff, or them making these Instagram videos and stuff. When you're winning, you can make any sort of videos or kind of, but when you're losing, and I think it reflects badly on a Ger Eoin being the hard man at 4 o'clock in the morning, giving verbals to a guy who's a very good commentator,
doing his job.
And you know, maybe he'd have been better advised to, you know, have verbals with Peter O'Mahony or Caelan Doris or Josh van der Fleer, because they totally outplayed him. And look, that's, you know, at the end of the day, I think Savea and Eoin actually did okay for the All Blacks in that third test. He got a very good try, Eoin, I think, but he's not a regular on the All Blacks team, and that doesn't mean you can't tell someone what you think of him, but I just think it reflects a little bit worse on him.
Do it in the morning in the cold light of day.
Yeah, or do it at one of the training sessions, a media event or something, and when you're interviewed, say, I'm not impressed with what he's saying or whatever. But anyway, look, things happen with a few beers on board, and I was kind of surprised that they were all there. I think they had a curfew to kind of leave. Maybe the curfew was 4 o'clock in the morning. It was a late curfew, but I was surprised, given, you know, you're in New Zealand, you've just lost a series, and the New Zealand public are pretty vocal and opinionated about their team, and they're not used to losing. So I'm not sure I would have been in that situation myself. I probably would have been ducking away, hiding somewhere for having a few beers.
Were they good losers?
Yeah, I think they were. They were very gracious in Wellington. I think there was a few issues in Dunedin that I spoke to you about. Again, I even said that to Justin Marsh and Jeff Wilson when we were chatting, and they were kind of saying, look, it's, you know, a lot of students, a lot of guys maybe not affiliated to rugby clubs, they're just off for a bit of a party, and so it was a minority who kind of were a bit rude and stuff at that game in Dunedin, not to me but to some of the Irish supporters, but you know, the people in Wellington were And by and large, they were very, very, very gracious and complimentary of what Ireland achieved. And I think Ireland gained unbelievable respect with the performances.
What do you think about them sacking some of the backroom team? It always feels a bit to me like
scapegoats.
Who picked them in the first place?
Yeah, you either stick together or you go together, I think, and that's. But look, sometimes if the dynamic is not right, and you know, it's always a danger of coaches bringing in pals or friends or guys they've worked well with before. Rugby changes a lot. The game is kind of keeps evolving, and probably the Northern Hemisphere has probably shown that to the Southern Hemisphere, and it's probably the biggest wake-up call for them that, you know, this X-factor brilliance or natural ability, there needs to be more to it than now, because the game is like, it's a real science now. Sometimes it's quite boring to watch, but you know, recently we've seen, and those test series in the summer's shown that, you know, it can be very, very, very exciting as well. So I think it was John Plumtree and, you know, I just think it's the two coaches going for the All Blacks is a little bit. But maybe the people who'll come in, Jason Ryan has come in, and I know he's highly thought of as the forwards coach in the Crusaders. And, you know, the New Zealand forwards looked to lack a bit of cohesion and understanding and implement any sort of force against Ireland in that second and third test. And, you know, if you look at Ireland scoring 2 maul tries, and I know that from being a forward before, it's kind of like front row's being pushed back in a scrum. It's you're being beaten by the opposition pack when the opposition are scoring maul tries. So I think they've jumped straight away and said our forwards are not performing well enough. Maybe they're not being coached well enough. And this guy Jason Ryan has done a really good job for the Crusaders. And of course, there's a number of Crusaders forwards there. You know, Whitelock.
So it might work out, but it's not a great sign.
No, well, it's a sign that it's an admission that there's problems there.
What we did is probably walk ourselves into a bit of trouble here this morning, Alan.
I hate this.
We've done this before. We've talked about combined sides. So I think maybe we should give ourselves a little bit of a shield here. If you'd picked a combined team after the first test, how many Ireland players would there have been in it?
3, 4. There would have been 11 or 12 New Zealanders, and that was based probably on about 15 minutes of absolute brilliance where they just blew Ireland away, and they were ruthless in the tries they scored. I think the 6 tries they scored in that first test, and I've probably said it numerous times, and this was probably maybe the problem for New Zealand. At least 4 of them were preventable, and that sounds a little bit arrogant in saying that, but I think when you review it, they were probably soft tries for Ireland to give up, and that's probably the week of that second test. I think Andy Farrell and all the players, and I know from kind of listening to what they were saying and their body language, they really believed that they could fix some of the issues, and maybe New Zealand thought, well, the same is going to happen again. We're going to have, you know, individual brilliance that's just going to blow Ireland away, and we'll up the tempo, and we'll keep the scoreboard just out of reach for Ireland. And but you know, there was a number of New Zealand players played really well. Scott Barrett was brilliant in that first test, you know, and I think he was a loss for him in
the third test.
Yeah,
definitely
a big loss. And I think obviously moving into the second round, Whitelock missing the, you know, kind of took a line out option and took him out of the back row, even though, you know, traditionally he's a second row. But you know, if you go to the second and third test, then like being respectful, I think the reality is that Ireland were pretty dominant in you know, both those matches. I think the 15-20 minute period after half time in the third test was Ireland were under the cosh, and you know, when it came back to 25-22 with Will Jordan's try, you think trouble. But, it just goes to show how mentally strong Ireland were.
That's the
up to the
best
field.
part about it.
Yeah, I think that was the most pleasing thing for people. But and then some of the defence at the end, because that's stuff that you can really, really build on, and they didn't get it easy. So, picking a combined team is risky territory. I think we did it a few years ago, but it's based on kind of the most recent results.
It's not forever. No.
Yeah, it's
not like
it's kind of stupid in some ways, in a sense that there's only, you're splitting hairs between certain players and a little bit of form at a period of time. And
just for all our New Zealand viewers, and hello to you all. After the first test, the only Irish players who you would have had in were Sheehan, Furlong, Josh van der Fleer and James Lowe. 11 All Blacks, and you could have had a row about some of those as well. But anyway, after the third test, where we've just created
and
history.
if I just clarify that, Ty Furlong was under a bit of pressure. The scrum wasn't perfect, but I just thought his play around the field. I just thought Sheehan was incredible for all those games. He's just non-stop.
Yeah.
And he's one of those kind of incredible footballers. He's a stepper, he's pace, he's acceleration, phenomenal player. Josh van der Fleer for me in all three tests was sensational.
If he stays fit for the rest of the year, he has to be World Player of the Year.
Yeah,
Very
for sure.
close to it.
I think his form is just incredible. And even in that first test, tackle after tackle after tackle after jackal at the breakdown, support play, hunting on the inside, carries, and just the level of performance. James Lowe was on the wing in that after the first test. Did James Lowe have a brilliant game in the first test? Probably not. He didn't do anything wrong, but Fenga and Nuku didn't really do much for New Zealand either. So again, you kind of, that's a tricky one, and that's no disrespect. James Lowe was brilliant in Test 2 and Test 3, as were all the Irish players.
Can I just ask a quick question? Why does James Lowe not take all of the penalties that we have with his big left boot? Why does he not just kick the touch? Like, why are we still letting Sexton do it? Just give your leg a rest there. This guy's he's got a cannon. Just let him do it. Because he does it sometimes. Randomly, they'll throw him the ball and he'll kick it and it goes miles. And then other times you're like, just give it to him.
Yeah, he punts it a mile up the field, doesn't he? I think the accuracy part, and Johnny's probably missed one or two to touch in the last couple of years, and sometimes he looks a little bit fatigued. But
and look, with this is
he's kicking is still fine, but I think maybe out of your own half, maybe if you want to really go Lambert for distance,
which he can do. Like, he's one of the longest kickers of a ball I've seen in any sport.
For you, is that fair enough? 11-12 New Zealanders after
totally.
Test 1.
Absolutely.
They win by pretty dominant scoreline. I think Ireland's performance in the second half was heartening. They were held up over the line 4 or 5 times. The Yardi Sevilla try, you'd say, is preventable. It's brilliant out of him. He's an incredible player. and Sawakula try after scrum, again, preventable. Peter O'Mahony and the referee Carl Dixon probably got their... Peter O'Mahony wasn't happy that he thought Carl Dixon blocked him. Of course, he didn't do that intentionally, but you just look at the tries and the scores and think they're preventable. And I just thought the heart and the kind of effort out of the team in the second half gave them some hope.
Okay, so we're going to flip it the other way. So Jordy Barrett makes it, Sever Reece makes it, Ardy Sevilla makes it, and is that it? Is there 3? Is it 12? 3?
For the
4.
Oh, Will Jordan, yeah.
And Will Jordan, yeah.
Will Jordan is one of the greatest rugby players.
It's hard to
great to watch, isn't he?
He really only had that try.
Yeah.
But because he's so good, when you look at him, it's hard to leave him out of any team. So I just think, and then Robbie Henshaw's at 13, Gary Ringrose, if he played the first test, he could be. I think they had a big problem with their midfield in the 3 tests. Although Rico Ioane probably saved 2 tries. I don't know if you remember that period where he tackled Joey Carberry over the line. They looked at it, thought it was a seatbelt tackle. I think he held up another Irish player. He saved 2 tries in that first test. I think he's a winger. Quinn Tupaya scored a try from the kick through from Bowden Barrett in that first test. I think midfield is a problem for him. David Havili had COVID before the first test. He was probably going to start at 12. But I think it's an issue. So I think 2 of the Irish, Henshaw, Ringrose and Aki, 2 of them go in there.
I think
3.
Yeah, and so that's the backs, and obviously Sexton played his best ever games for Ireland.
And if you look at Jordy Barrett at full back, Hugo Keenan was absolutely brilliant. But you've just got this freak of Geordie Barrett. He's a phenomenal player, and I think they probably would be better off trying to play him at 12. So again, that's unfair. Sevu Reece, that second test, I think he made 3 tackles in one kind of phase and 2 turnovers in the space of about a minute. He's just kind of one of those outlandish players as well. So
Tyburn-esque.
Yeah.
But you've picked the whole pack apart from Artie Sevilla, and no one could complain about that because our pack was completely dominant in the third test.
Do you know what? Anyone who's going to criticise this online or make comments or whatever, I'm fine with that. Tell me who else should be in here based on test 2 and 3. So should Sam Kane be in there ahead of Josh van der Fleer? No. Should
Whitelock?
Well, Dalton Papali'i started at 6 in the second test, and then Ger Eoin started at 6 in the third test. So should either of them be there ahead of Peter O'Mahony based on the
not on this test series
2 or 3?
No.
Artie Sevilla.
This isn't a team that's ever going to play. This is an all-star team at the end of the season.
Artie Sevilla over Caelan Doris. I thought Caelan Doris was brilliant in test 2 or 3. You asked me about the performance in 1. He wasn't.
Well, he was on the verge of being dropped.
He wasn't that prominent, and I think in test 2 and 3 he was outstanding. He showed what kind of a footballer, and the carries, the pace. He can run at full pace and just step someone going into contact, and he gets through that little gap. But Artie Sevilla is just a freak in the best way possible. I think he'd 19 carries in that third test, and 2-3 players hanging off him. He nearly dragged the All Blacks back into the game.
There was one thing that I haven't talked about on air yet. There was footage on one of the Instagram accounts of the Irish players at the end getting their photographs. The players the fans who stayed at the stadium asking the Irish players to take photographs, and eventually Sexton, give me the phone. But Artie Sevilla is over like bloodied. This is like at the end still getting his photograph taken and taking the phone off people and going, yeah, okay, no problem. I'll still post for photographs even though we've just made bad history here. He seems like a top man.
Yeah, it seems so. And I think they were obviously they were very disappointed, but I think he was the one that could really walk around with his kind of head held high because he was so involved in everything.
Yeah.
James Ryan, Tyburn, the second row. Sam Whitelock didn't really see him in that third test, and Brodie Retallick, up to the point that he went off again, they weren't really doing anything. So I think James Ryan was outstanding in that third test and in test 2 as well. So and then of course Tyburn, what he did at the end with the turnovers and the big moments in the game.
Who's on your shortlist for player of the series?
I would say you could pick 3 or 4 easily who were. It's probably unfair. Like, I think Dan Sheehan, Tyburn, Van der Fleer, O'Mahony, Sexton for what he did, Hugo Keenan. There's about 6 there that just slightly edge ahead of the others.
Yeah. And who would your player of the tournament have been then?
It's tricky. I'd love to watch back the matches again and kind of go to them with a fine-tooth comb, but I think it'd be between Sheehan, Van der Fleer and O'Mahony. I probably would save Josh Van der Fleer given his high level of performance all the way through in each 80 minutes.
Even in defeat, yeah. Martin Connell's been in touch on YouTube to say, good man Quinny, you did a great job tracking the news over in New Zealand. You got plenty of thumbs up and cheers walking up and down the steps in the cake tin. You spoke well in the breakdown too on Sky. And then it's whatever those symbols are. Thumbs up, basically. So you've won a legion of new fans.
You usually get too many compliments, but anyway.
Not from New Zealand anyway.
No, they were very good, I think, because I did go on the breakdown on a Sunday night, and they were trying to press me and think, are Ireland going to win next week in the second test? And I was, what I really believed, Ger, was that they would be a lot better and they would run them close. I think you were trying to get it out of me that it was going to be a disaster, and it
felt that it could go either way.
It felt after the Maori one and the first one, this is going to be a long tour. But I think when you're on the ground, and it's kind of hard to explain, when you watch training, when you see the players, when you listen to the press conferences and you feel a little bit of energy, it's kind of strange. Some people will say that doesn't make any difference, but I think the psychology in sport makes a difference when you're kind of back. Of course it does. And I just thought Ireland really kind of had probably looked at the video, were frustrated with some of the decisions that went against them. And
O'Mahony's post-match interview was unbelievably positive after the first one, and I was very taken aback by it. But he was like, "We're right in this." And at the time, before, you know, in the heat of that moment, you're like, "We weren't though. We just got slaughtered." But actually, he knew that they'd been held up over the line.
You know, it does make a difference that they'd a lot of these guys have beaten New Zealand a number of times in the last few years. So
that was the difference, maybe, between
the second half was the key. I thought the easy thing to do would be, and probably we expected it at half time, this is going to get nasty and ugly in the second half. But Ireland, you know, I know they still lost the game, I think it was 32-17, but Gary Ringrose's try, Bundy Aki's try, and then the amount of times in possession and the amount of times they were held up over the line gave them belief that if we fix the scrum issues, and a couple of line-out issues, and probably a couple of kicks that they put into the backfield where they didn't manage their kicking game as well, I think they felt really that they would have a great chance in the second test. And the impressive thing for me was, because I think the great thing about winning the third test is there was kind of reasons to say, well, the sending off, the yellow cards, that affected New Zealand, and we kind of got the luck on the night. And we did get a little bit of a bounce of the ball here and there, but I just thought that third test, that first half and the third test, unbelievable. You know, the kick chase, Ger, the organisation.
They were savage.
I didn't mention Robbie Henshaw and Tyg Furlong, but I tell you, the tackles that those guys put in. And when you're there and you're kind of looking down and you see the work rate of some of the players, like Robbie Henshaw made some incredible reads there that stopped the likes of Sevu Reece getting the ball or Bowden Barrett getting on the outside channel. I think from that 50-22 that Peter O'Mahony did in the second test, Richie we lost that line out. I think it went over the top. They tried to move it straight away, and Bowden Barrett gave this kind of wide overs pass, which means the pass is going to your outside and it's going to cross you, and he was swerving to get outside the defender. Robbie Henshaw made this incredible read, man ball, tackles. Sevu Reece comes in and tackles one of the Irish players
through
past the ruck. 3 points to Ireland, you know. It's moments like that.
Well, that goes try the other end.
If Robbie Henshaw's not switched on, he's not such an intelligent, brilliant defender with a wonderful work rate, they could be gone into the field.
All right. Well, I hope your social media is fine after this. I think it will be. I think they're not in any position yet to come after you, but they'll save it for next year or the World Cup quarter final.
Well, that's the thing, you know. And I look back at the team, and we think maybe this will all happen again, and we end up playing them in the World Cup quarter-final or France if we get out of the group and if we beat Scotland. And will we have the disappointment? But this tour was incredible, and they deserve massive credit. So, and I think Andy Farrell got the mood right each week, and his coaches, they were absolutely brilliant.
No, very impressive character. Quinny, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers, sir.
That is OTB AM for you today, live each morning, brought to you by Gillette Labs for an effortless finish today. Owen, are you coming back? Are you just moving to Kerry again? Is that what's happened?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. No, I've been existing in Dublin for long enough with Dublin winning on Ireland, so I'll be back in Dublin tomorrow, back in studio.
Right, okay. I thought that you were like gathering copy for us last night, and that we were going to have loads of colour and stuff from the homecoming. That was like, I'm going home to cover the homecoming. You were going home to get pissed, basically.
There was no agreement that I was going to go home to work.
I just assumed that you would have been there experiencing it and bringing it to us, as opposed to everybody having to imagine from the croakiness in your voice, which in its own way painted as good a picture as any of the content that you failed to bring us.
This is colour. What you're hearing right now is colour. It is #content.
OTB AM back tomorrow morning from 7:30, where we'll be joined by the award-winning football journalist Jonathan Wilson for our first ever episode of You Had to Be There, where Jonathan will pick the best individual performances that he's seen in person. Also, we're live with the former Ireland captain Emma Byrne as England play Sweden tonight in the Euro 2022 semi-final. We're going to hear from Limerick's Seamus Hickey on what made Brian Cody's Kilkenny sides so formidable. Right now, we're going to leave you with some Eddie Brennan and Michael Fennelly goodness from last night's show and the impact that Cody had on their inter-county careers. Enjoy. See you tomorrow.
Can you imagine how many interview requests that man has turned down from The Late Late Show and everybody else? like in 24 years and just no interest. And it's kind of funny, you said he had the surgery and it wasn't like it was, he was giving all you guys his innermost thoughts. So like a difficult man, Eddie, to get very close to from this vantage point, certainly, and probably to an extent even as a player.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I come back to consistency. I think there's a level of that, as Fennelly said, it has to be natural, because otherwise, if you're trying to put on something and trying to be someone you're not, it will catch up with you and you'll be found out. It's not genuine, it's not real. So I think, in that regard, he was so consistent. And I would even argue, I read where Alex Ferguson, referred to even, the post-match interviews as being really important. I think Brian Cody's were well planned out, and I think in his own head, he was utterly consistent with those. He gave very little away. He was quite general and, always passed himself off quite well with interview, whereas poor old Marty one time. But generally, I think he was so consistent. But in the group, you're talking about maybe, being close to him. Yeah, we got to know him, and it wasn't put on by Brian. He was never trying to be someone he wasn't with us. Like, he was himself out and out. But I think he got a kick out of, even the group, like the celebrations, from, I suppose, a part, he would be there, part of it, but not necessarily, letting fly or letting the handbrake off. I think he got a kick out of seeing us kind of enjoying things, like even on team holidays. He never was overpowering or ever looking over your shoulder. He was more than happy to let us off and do our thing. I think even on some of the team holidays, you wouldn't even know he was around, and he never was intrusive in that regard. But I suppose, like you said there, with the likes of the heart surgery and stuff, he was solely focused on what was the best for Kilkenny. Everything else he saw as a distraction. He did not want to be participating in or anything like that.
And Eddie, even on the team holidays away from the public glare, I suspect he wasn't getting up and singing Piano Man or something.
No, I think one year some of the girls might have managed to get him up on a counter in a pub somewhere over in Asia somewhere. I don't know, but I think there was. But that would be, in fairness to him, he wasn't, he wasn't rude either. Like, he would be there and he would be happy that, I think what he was probably more mindful of was that we were all there together. I think that was the key thing with Brian. He was very much focused on the group, and I'm sure from afar he watched even how we interacted. He put a huge value on us. The only time I ever heard him maybe having a little kind of growl at us about our interactions was that you had to go down to Langton's for the food. That was part of training session, to go down there and sit down together and be each other's company and have those chats. And he put probably huge value on those things. And like I said, the one word I've been trying to think of, it comes back to it. You've heard him say it, and just spirit was everything to him, and that spirit of the group. And anyone that came between that or interfered with that, he would be happy to make that decision.
Yeah. Can you imagine how many interview requests that man has turned down from the Late Late Show and everybody else? Like, in 24 years and just no interest. And it's kind of funny, you said he had the surgery and it wasn't like it was, he was giving all you guys his innermost thoughts. So, like, a difficult man, Eddie, to get very close to from this vantage point, certainly, and probably to an extent even as a player.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I come back to consistency. I think there's a level of that, as Fennelly said, it has to be natural, because otherwise, if you're trying to put on something and trying to be someone you're not, it will catch up with you and you'll be found out. It's not genuine, it's not real. So I think, in that regard, he was so consistent. And I would even argue, I read where Alex Ferguson, referred to even, the post-match interviews as being really important. I think Brian Cody's were well planned out, and I think in his own head, he was utterly consistent with those. He gave very little away. He was quite general and, always passed himself off quite well with interview, whereas poor old Marty one time. But generally, I think he was so consistent. But in the group, you're talking about maybe, being close to him. Yeah, we got to know him, and it wasn't put on by Brian. He was never trying to be someone he wasn't with us. Like, he was himself out and out. But I think he got a kick out of, even the group, like the celebrations, from, I suppose, a part, he would be there, part of it, but not necessarily, letting fly or letting the handbrake off. I think he got a kick out of seeing us kind of enjoying things, like even on team holidays. He never was overpowering or ever looking over your shoulder. He was more than happy to let us off and do our thing. I think even on some of the team holidays, you wouldn't even know he was around, and he never was intrusive in that regard. But I suppose, like you said there, with the likes of the heart surgery and stuff, he was solely focused on what was the best for Kilkenny. Everything else he saw as a distraction. He did not want to be participating in or anything like that.
And Eddie, even on the team holidays away from the public glare, like I suspect he wasn't getting up and singing Piano Man or something.
No, I think one year some of the girls might have managed to get him up on a counter in a pub somewhere over in Asia somewhere, I don't know. But I think there was. But that would be, you know, in fairness to him, like he wasn't, you know, he wasn't rude either. Like he would be there and he would be happy that, I think what he was probably more mindful of was that we were all there together. I think that was the key thing with Brian. He was very much focused on the group. And I'm sure from afar he watched even how we interacted. He put a huge value on us. The only time I ever heard him maybe having a little kind of growl at us about our interactions was that you had to go down to Langton's for the food. That was part of training session, to go down there and sit down together and be each other's company and have those chats. And he put probably huge value on those things. And like I said, the one word I've been trying to think of, it comes back to it, you've heard him say it, and just spirit was everything to him, and that spirit of the group. And anyone that came between that or interfered with that, he would be happy to make that decision.
Yeah. Michael, the word ruthless would be used about him as well.
Yeah, without doubt. Just to follow on just from Eddie's point there, I recall maybe my first or second year, I ended up down in Langton's after one of the matches, and the league match, and myself and my housemate PJ Delaney, the girlfriends were down there basically in Langton's, and we met them. We said, here, sure, we'll have food with these, like, you know, and the players were close by basically having their food, and that was all grand. And Brian saw us there or whatever and didn't think anything of it. And then on the Tuesday night, then he called myself and PJ before training and basically said, the players eat together and that's it. And we were like, right, and that was that. And, you know, even the holidays too, there was a bit of talks about lads going here and going there, and Brian kind of put a stop to that quick enough, said everyone goes together. Right. We all go together wherever we're going. So definitely that side of things was important. And look, he kept his distance, and I think probably I came in 2006, Eddie was there a good few years previous to me, and Eddie probably could tell us a bit more about this now, but I think he probably was a bit more engaging, or a bit more, you know, a bit more friendship maybe earlier on, but I think he would have learned himself that he needs to keep distance, and needs, you know, he's not here to make friends as such. He's here to do a job. He's here to get Kilkenny hurling up to a high level. He's here to bring back Liam McCarthy cups, and what better way to do that is maybe to keep his distance as a manager to a degree, and you know, manage that effectively. And I think he treated everyone pretty much the same in that context as well. Like no one was ever favoured on any side of that basically.
Yeah, I
think just on that, Joe. Yeah, just on that, I think 2004, I think he definitely felt that maybe a little bit of loyalty to certain players in the run into that 04 All-Ireland or during that series probably maybe cost us. And I can say hand on heart, you know, looking back at that, my own form wasn't very good. And I think he probably felt afterwards that, you know, he looked at, I think when you lose, it's the symptoms of losing. You see the little small things that are those inches that you lose it on. And I think in his gut, his heart of hearts that time, I think he felt no. He said, you know, I much and all as I, you know, I'm attached to the lads and I'm responsible for them and all that. I think he definitely did want to make sure that it interfered with a decision that was in the best interest of the team.
That's interesting. So that that shows a certain human side, that he knows if he lets himself, he could become very friendly with the players. But it's almost, I'm not going to let that happen.
Yeah, and with that, Joe, as well. And I've said this there the last few days, like that. You know, anything. You know, we never heard. Like I never heard. You know, stuff that happened with Fennelly behind the scenes, or vice versa. And I'm talking hypothetically here. Like Brian Cody was so confidential with anything. Like, you know, I had one or two things where, you know, it was, you know, you went to him privately about something, or he would contact you, and that was it. You knew that it would not be discussed in the group, or it wouldn't get out or anything like that. And I think it was, you know, there were certain probably funny episodes too that we only heard in later years went on, and you never heard them at the time. I suppose we were all so focused on getting the bit most out of ourselves, you didn't want to know about, you know, other little bits and pieces. And there was no doubt about it. Look, as Fennelly said there, that, you know, the words stern and firm and ruthless and all that. But there was also very much a human side there. And, you know, I think, you know, Larks was probably the one example of that was to the forefront. So there was a bit of everything. But, you know, ultimately, I suppose his focus was, what do I do here to get the best out of somebody, or what's in the best interest of the group to help this individual or whatever.
Yeah, well, you're talking of a trust that was there as well then amidst everything else. You know, if you could go to him, that speaks of a certain trust for sure.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, Joe, and you have to have that with your manager and players. And speaking of trust there, I'll tell you a funny one. We were up in Carton House there for a weekend for a training camp back maybe in 13, probably 14, 15. It's 2014 maybe, or even earlier actually. Sorry, no, maybe 2011, 2012. And I think we played poorly in one of our games, championship games. I think we won, but we're doing an analysis afterwards. And now this is trust between players. And Brian was asking the question, what was happening here, what was going on? We're losing a lot of balls here and we weren't playing well. And I think Michael Rice said, look, I don't think we trust each other, on the field. And next thing, everyone's like, oh, jeez, no trust. There's no trust, within the team. And Tommy Welsh goes, well, the forwards are not working hard enough. Tommy said something like this anyway. The next thing, the forwards start looking across at Tommy anyway, and we're playing an internal game then the following day. And basically, the first ball Tommy got anyway at half back, he was absolutely poleaxed by about four or five different forwards. Richie Power was one of them who was in the front trying to kill him. So look, that was probably more trust around players. But as I said, Brian had that confidence there and with players and anything he had to say around that was private. And again, everyone goes through different things, whether it's relationship, financial, college, work-wise, he was always open there to talk to, and he had that. Yeah, he definitely had that sensitive side, I suppose, that no one else really saw a whole pile, and we saw glimpses of it every so often when it was needed.
Yeah, because I saw in Dennis Walsh at a piece of the weekend, and for instance, he quoted John Tennyson, who said if you were out of favour, I suppose, in terms of team selection, you could go months without a word from him. It wasn't like he was coming over to put an arm around your shoulder and make sure you're okay, that you're not in the team. You were outside the team and you have to fight your way back in. That seems to be the environment he was happy enough to create, Eddie, or thought it was the best environment. Is that your memory of how it was?
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. In 2006, I certainly found myself on the outside and I came very, very close to jacking the whole thing in. I had a very, very poor league campaign. I think I got in for the Antrim in the league match, and the Laois match was the extent of my participation. And it was just, I was playing poorly, there's no doubt about that. But then when it came to championship, I felt, you were coming back into form and different things. And there was a level of, there was actually no communication really from them to say, look, and sometimes you crave that. I think you just need something to maybe, just a word here or there can sometimes fix it. But I suppose I would like to think that he was kind of keeping you out in the cold, making you want to come back in, or that he wanted you to figure it out for yourself. Now I'd argue, look, maybe a little bit more, but at the same time it worked because it was down to me. There was no point in me kind of saying, well, Fenno can fix it for me, or Cav or whoever can fix it for me. I can't. I have to go fix it myself, and you have to start approaching training in a better frame of mind, or you have to, it forced me to go and find the answers myself, and so in that regard, you can say, look, I found it worked for me because you wanted it enough to go and find the answers yourself. But certainly at times, look, there was that going on. But I think, in modern maybe coaching, I suppose you'd like to think that, look, maybe there's a little bit of that goes on. A little bit more. You have to, I suppose, tailor your approach because, you're talking about a multitude of different personalities now. So, what worked for me mightn't necessarily work for the guy next year. But at the same time, what you have to, I suppose, you look at is the record, and sometimes, there's a little bit of collateral damage sometimes with that, and sometimes, and I suppose that's a manager's big decision or big dilemmas sometimes is what's the greater need here, or what's the focus with a view to getting the group to perform or whatever the next day. But it's a tricky one. It's and look, every manager will probably be different in how they deal with it.
That is seriously sink or swim stuff, though, Michael.
Look, it is, Joe. It is. Look, I think a lot of us struggled probably personally at times, especially when you're not going well and you probably don't know where you stand. Maybe and I would have probably struggled myself the first couple of years. In and out of form, injuries. And sometimes, look, you do need a word in the ear in terms of what you need to do. And funny enough, it was actually Mick Dempsey actually leading into 2007 All-Ireland final against Limerick. We're about 2 weeks out, and I was hurling all right. I was coming on in the games and that, and making a bit of an impact, but probably still hurling average enough. And I remember I was poking around before training session, and Mick just kind of was coming over towards me, and he was putting out cones, and he just said to me, "Would you ever just get stuck into train? Just get stuck into it." And I kind of, those words just literally just fell to me like, here, I need to really step up here now, or else I won't be on the 26th or the 30th time, or I might even make the panel. Like, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking worst case scenario here, like I won't even make the match day. And by God, did I throw myself into that session that day, and ended up actually doing a tackling drill with Henry, the worst person I could have got. But my God, I gave him hell. Now, he still won most of the balls, but I made sure he didn't get it out too easy. And in the match then too, I just absolutely ran everywhere. I ran myself to death in that session. And lo and behold, I came on at half time that day against Limerick, and thankfully did well, and I came on. But those words were absolutely key to me. They were golden, and they would have came from Mick. And just going back in your point on with Brian, like, I have seen players probably who have went away because probably they didn't get that bit of communication. But I have to say, from my own experience as manager, you have 40 odd players there. It's next to impossible to get to all 40 players. Right. It's next to impossible to give every bit of communication to each and every player, the one-to-ones that they all crave for. You can't do it. Your management team is massively important, and even at that is still a struggle. And sometimes, as Eddie said, you got to work things out for themselves, and you don't want to be having one-to-ones every week either, and constantly onto players. And sometimes I think just leave them alone maybe and let them figure it out. So it's a balancing act. A lot of us, like I nearly went myself in 2010. TJ Reid nearly went in 2011, I think. So it was cutthroat, it was ruthless, without a shadow of a doubt. And maybe Brian wasn't aware maybe of players suffering a bit, maybe with a lack of communication. I don't know, to be honest. There was never major feedback on that side of things as players. Maybe nowadays you can do surveys and stuff, and we're probably a bit more modern maybe with what we do, but I have to say, you never get it right though.
No, as a manager. No. It's so interesting to get those insights. I mean, one area where you'd have to say, Eddie, he really did modernise is in terms of Kilkenny's tactical approach, even just in recent years. And
OTB AM
with Gillette. Get into your flow with the new Gillette Labs Razor with exfoliating bar.